allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This meeting is being live streamed by Chelmsford Telemedia and posted to the CPS website for interested community members to access and watch. In-person public participation will be taking place tonight in accordance with social distancing and safety protocols established by the Chelmsford School Committee Public Participation Guidelines. Anyone interested in speaking during the public input session of the meeting would notify the superintendent's office by yesterday afternoon. Have been provided with these guidelines and assigned a time to attend the meeting to speak. If anyone watching this meeting live has questions or comments to share, they're encouraged to email one of us during the meeting. We'll read their questions or comments during our second public input session at the end of the meeting. All right, so welcome to this meeting of the Chelmsford School Committee. First item of our agenda is approval of our minutes for our meeting on, what was it, August 9th.
I move that the school committee approve the minutes of the regular school committee meeting on August 9th.
Second.
Okay. Anybody have any corrections for the minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
4-0. All right, any good news?
Yeah, good news. So our new staff will be coming and joining us tomorrow as well as on Thursday. So we're excited to have them come and introduce ourselves to them and them to us. It's always a good event. And just lots of activity at the school. This was the week that teachers were welcome to come back, start setting up their classrooms. So you can see all the activity happening, and it's just good to, see everybody again and know that the school year is starting.
Great. Anybody else want to share anything at this point?
I think some student activities are starting as well, and this week there is band camp. And I think Thursday
Yep,
is
Thursday
the
at 5.
performance. If folks are interested in seeing it.
I think athletics as well, right? Started this week?
It's at the,
Yes.
Yeah.
it's at the stadium. Yeah, it's at the stadium, so.
Okay, great. All right, we're now to our first public input part of our meeting. As mentioned previously, anyone who wanted to participate in tonight's meeting needed to email the superintendent. We did have one registered speaker, but I don't see him at this point. So I guess we'll move forward. If he shows up, maybe we can do something at the end of the meeting. All right, so moving on to new business. First item is approval of 2021-22 student handbooks.
Yep, thank you. So Linda's actually going to walk us through the district student handbook, and then Principal Murray's here. Steve, if you wanted to make your way up to the other chair, you're welcome. We'll do the district handbook first, and then we'll walk through the high school one.
So as Dr. Lang said, we do have, it sounds like 2 handbooks, but it's really one. The main handbook for all students, pre-K through 12, is the one that I'm going to be discussing that you have in your packet as your first item. The high school has what's called the addendum to the handbook because there are many other factors that involved high school students that wouldn't necessarily affect all students in the district, so we keep them separate. Although anything in this first one that we're discussing does apply to high school students as well. So there weren't a lot of changes for the handbook for the school year. Every year we need to bring this forward to the committee just for review. Everybody puts their eyes on it based on their different sections. So there were a couple of attendance updates in there that, just some antiquated language in there that just really wasn't applicable. I think in general, as we looked at the attendance section of this handbook, we're going to take a deeper dive into it because there are some just discrepancies in general. So what happens is we have these excused and not excused absences, but really in the eyes of the Department of Ed, there is no excused absence. You are either in school or not in school. I think excused and unexcused absences kind of came into play for, if you had a doctor's appointment and you missed part of the day, but then you really wanted to go to your activity, you could, but you had a scheduled appointment. So I think it was just district-made. So we're going to take a better look at that and just really explain the difference between absences that are excused that allow you to participate in other things during the school day opposed to just unexcused, like you're just not showing up to school. So rather than upset the apple cart for this school year and really, look at making some significant changes, we're going to put a smaller committee together. But we did take out some of the antiquated language for this year that just really wasn't applicable, like the principal approving, absences. It just doesn't happen because you can't actually really approve people being absent. We want them to come to school. So those were the changes in that section that you might have seen. And then there were some removals and continuation. If you remember last year, rather than changing the whole handbook, due to the COVID protocols and the schedules and everything else that went in there, we put like small disclaimers at the beginning of each of those sections where we thought it was applicable. We took out all of them except for the section into health, because we do know there's still going to be some health protocols for this year. So we left that in the handbook, and you'll see that section that's in there. One other small section was just the physician update. So Dr. Kaplan is no longer the town physician. And rather than naming the person, because again, every time you make a change in a handbook, you have to bring it to the committee. So we're just going to leave it as the school physician rather than naming the person directly. And then the last one, I think this was just an omission. One of the principals brought it up. We had in the past, the lockdown as one of our protocols, the only protocol, if there was any type of intruder in a school. And for some reason, we did not have our ALICE option-based protocols sitting in this handbook, which we have been using. So we just made sure we put it in there and just removed the lockdown information. So again, not a lot of significant changes, some updates, and then any of the other little nuances is just, indenting and little things, grammatical pieces that we made some changes. Once we get this approved, we'll clean up the formatting, because you'll see some gaps and some areas where things need to be put together. So once this gets approval this evening, we'll clean it up, make sure the formatting is right, and and send this out to parents and have that obviously posted on our school websites.
Any questions on the handbook? Any things people found? Okay.
I did have one question, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry to do this. I'm not sorry to do this. I need to do this. So question for you, under the handbook, let's say, how quarantine, students that have to quarantine, is there anything in this handbook that we need to address as that being an absence that's okay or not okay?
Not in this current handbook, it's that disclaimer piece, and I think that's what we were saying, is as we go through tonight, we're gonna obviously be talking about some of those protocols that will change. There is a section under the health services that says we will follow any of the protocols, and if that does affect absences as we go along, we would just know that that's necessary to address at the school level rather than change the whole handbook under the whole absence section.
Okay.
Other question, Donna?
Will you still be asking parents to send in notes, or will your committee be discussing this, just for documentation purposes?
So there's two different things that happen. So at the elementary level, they usually do send in a note or make a phone call. Parents, because that, we need to know where those students are immediately. And then what happens at the middle school and high school level, parents either call in or send a note, but no matter what, they'll get that robocall that goes out to the parents. So we're not changing any of those protocols. They all have their own nuances, but for the elementary level, they usually do send in a note. They usually know ahead of time if they're going to be absent too, for any appointments.
Good.
And I had a chance to talk to Dr. Lang about this, but just so that, I just wanted to make sure that people at home were clear on this. Under the ALICE protocol, under evacuate, that whole paragraph was stricken.
Yep, so that was the old, so you got this as a PDF. It was track changes that turned into PDF. So that was the whole lockdown information
Right.
that was
Oh,
removed.
Okay.
And then just evacuate with that smaller definition is where it is. It's just where it lies in this document. It looks a little funky.
Right.
But that is all being stricken because that's all the definition under lockdown that used to be there.
Right, so under this particular paragraph, hang on.
What
We
page
talk
are you
about the
on?
drills. I am, why are you asking me these?
Was somewhere near.
I am in, right above delayed opening of school cast in the ALICE protocols.
But did it give a page number?
I have 69, but I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah, it's gotta be close. I'm just in the major document that's 191 pages, so, let's see. Okay, now,
So,
could you ask your question?
yes, so the question is, one of the things that was taken out was the drills will take place at least 2 times per year. So we're still going to do the drills, though.
Yeah, we actually do more Alice drills. We usually do up
Okay.
to 3 to 4 a year.
Okay, all right. I
That was,
just-
all of that was the whole paragraph under
Right,
lockdown that
right.
got removed.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure
Yep.
that that was still there.
Yeah, I mean, we actually spent a lot of time, I think it was about 3.5 years ago at this point, adopting all the different ALICE options-based protocols. So we do, I mean, we drill from the beginning of the school year right through. That's something we're going to continue doing. And, we'll get back on a regular schedule this year now that we'll have everyone back in the buildings.
Okay,
It's definitely staying.
great, thank you.
All right, other questions on the, do we have to approve this one separately, or do we do them together?
I would probably take a vote on them separately. I guess you could go either way, but
Good.
I move that the school committee approve the Chelmsford Public School District Handbook for the school year 2021, 2022.
Second. Okay, any other questions or discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
4-0.
Thank you.
next is the high school. Principal Murray, would you walk us through your changes?
Sure, happy to. Before I do, I just do two shout outs first. And the first one is I know that last year was difficult for everyone, but I think it was a successful year. It was overall. And I do believe, at least from my standpoint, it was my staff, their dedication, their creativity, and they just kept working at it and not knowing what's coming. And I'm really proud of them, how they worked last year. And I think we learned a lot together, and it's only going to help us get even better in the future. So I want to say that my staff was wonderful. The other one is a thank you to everyone here, that we have a lot of exciting changes that are coming to our building this year. And we had the science pond area, was totally landscaped. They have a dock. It's safe to go in there for the kids to do their experiments and to have class meetings. We're getting all new clocks in our buildings. Everyone's in the same time zone. That's going to be awesome. And we're also going to have a new gym floor and a vestibule. There's a lot of great changes there. So I want to say thank you. I know there's money can't go everywhere, and there's a lot of needs, so we're very appreciative of what the high school has got, so thank you. All right, so we have some changes at the high school, and some large, some not so much. So the first one was on page 18. It's just more of a process of visitors, how they enter the school, and that's the construction we did for the vestibule. They had a CAF 1. So what'll happen now, instead of kids or visitors or vendors, whatever, walking right into the flow of the building with the kids, they're gonna be held out, they're gonna be processed appropriately, and then they'll be greeted by the person or persons they're meeting with, will come down and get them, as opposed to them walking out. I think it's safer for everyone, for students and staff, and it's more consistent with what a lot of other schools are doing. The only difference is in our school, this school was built when it was an open campus. So it really wasn't, we didn't have that structure. So we do, that's the one, that was an addition. So that's just visitors in the process of entering, and that'll be from 7:30 in the morning after the kids get in, till 2:15 after the kids get out. And that'll be the process. On page 31 was varsity jackets. Our boosters president, Jamie Campo, and his merry band of followers are phenomenal. They do so much to support us, but they haven't had any fundraising in the last year and a half. And the jackets, the kids, they get it, it's been a tradition, there isn't the funds for that. So they want to focus their efforts this year on supporting a whole team directly, as well as scholarships and other initiatives. So we wanted to make that change so parents understood the reason why, because that's always been in our handbook about what varsity players get it. But they are going to let people know in terms of if they do want to purchase a jacket on their own, where they can do it and the costs, et cetera. There's going to be a link for that. So we just hope in a couple of years we can get back going again, but that was a change. Consequences for unexcused absences on page 40. So what has been in the policy for a while is for every time a student misses a class, skips or whatever, unexcused, they lose 2 points on their final grade. And so we were talking as a group and saying, we don't really feel comfortable giving academic consequences for a behavioral issue. And we have other issues, we have other ways we can deal with that, with detentions. And we felt that if a student isn't coming and then they're losing points on top of it, they'll never dig themselves out. So one of the proposing is we can take that part out of the losing points on their grade if they're absent. And we'll deal with it in other methods. And within the school, it could be detention, who knows, parent conference. But that was the, on page 40. Homework over vacations. Our policy before is kind of limited. We were proposing that we just do not have any homework on vacations. I think it's a time where everyone, staff and students, should just be with their families and recharge. I mean, because if you look at a lot of our kids, they do summer AP work, they work through their vacations, and I think this is a time where everyone has to recharge. And so we're proposing at this time that during the Thanksgiving break, the winter holiday break, February and April vacation, that we that we give everyone a break themselves and everyone recharges. That was one there. The next two is on page 53 and page 54. These are alternate sources for credit. So, and then the other one is for students taking new courses for enrichment or for resolving schedules difficulties. This has been a tough one. And that kids, sometimes they do need, maybe they don't pass a class, they need a credit recovery, and where they would take either a night class. Now we have Edgenuity program platform, which is wonderful, so kids can take that online course and make up those classes that they missed. The change here is that there's two things, is what some kids were doing, and is they were taking classes outside of school through a private institution, an online course, as a way to not have to make a choice in their schedule to say, all right, I'm gonna take these two courses, but I wanna take this. I can't take it at the same time. I'll take this at nighttime or in the summer. I'll get credit for it so I can fit this into a schedule. And it became problematic in math, mainly because if they're doing it in math, by the time they get to senior year, I don't have any math classes for them anymore. And then I have an obligation to give them a math class for Mass Core. Two, it's also supplanting my teachers. I have teachers who teach those classes, we hire them to teach those classes, but now we're outsourcing it. And I think that's not a good practice to have. And it also lowers the class rolls. So it makes it look like our school is not as full as it has been. And I think ultimately we need to help kids and guide them on prioritizing and making choices. So that was the purpose for those two right there. And because we do offer more electives than many schools around, as well as 20 AP courses. Now we have innovation pathways, and that brings us to independent studies next. But I think we need to help kids prioritize and fit those things into schedule when they can, as opposed to outsourcing outside. And the last one, independent studies. That's the same type of thing. Kids are curious about certain things that interest them, and they want to do independent study with a teacher. And when they do that, they come out of an elective. And what's difficult is that kids are creating this curriculum for a whole semester on their own and implementing it and getting credit for it. When a teacher creates curriculum for a semester for a year, they go through a committee, they vet it out, they see what works, what doesn't, they pilot it before it becomes official. Well, there's no process for that. And in addition to that, what it also does is we were having over 100 to almost 150 kids doing independent studies. That comes all out of our classes. I then have to make decisions based on our staffing levels, whether I have enough staff or I have too much staff. And I think I don't think that's a good or sustainable practice, because I can never address every kid's individual interest. And right now, how do I tell kids when there's 100 of them that, yes, you can do an independent study, but you can't? What's the basis or what's the importance of that? And that's where it became hard with some families, where I couldn't let some but not others. And I have yet to find a real solid reason why we can do an independent study for that. I think it's supplanting our teachers. It's taking kids out of roles, and they're getting credit for curriculum that really hasn't been vetted by a department or a committee. And then the last one is, where we recategorize. We have students who do jobs and mentoring in our building. They called it independent study, but they weren't studying. They were actually mentoring kids. So I changed it to jobs and mentoring. What does that include? It's our yearbook editors, it's our class officers, it's everyone helping in the PAVE, the NEC programs, and resiliency. And I think we want to continue that, because that is such a valuable component of CHS, of kids helping each other and kids working, that but we just want to classify it in the right way. It's not an independent study, it's a job and mentoring, so we're going to continue that. And then the last, we put dual enrollment in there. It's robust. We wanted to put a description in there. But those are our changes to date, proposed changes, that is.
Any questions? Donna?
Just with regards to, I just wanted to add something.
Sure.
To the online classes and the independent studies, the changes in that. I think it's also important to mention that the in-class experience is more than just the content.
Correct.
You know, there's a lot that can happen in a classroom that can be very fruitful and meaningful to students. And when they are doing an independent study or these online classes, they deprive themselves of that experience.
Yeah.
And the other is just monitoring.
Yeah.
You know, if you're doing an online class or you're doing an independent study, we want to make sure that there's a certain amount of integrity and accountability in those processes, and hard to do that if it's not something that goes through us.
It was, and now there's so many classes you can take online from organizations I'm not familiar with. The level of rigor between two kids taking the same class from different institutions were at times vastly different.
Sure,
And that's tough too, to balance that.
right,
You know,
right. So there is that level of accountability that I think that, we owe it to our students to give them the best education possible. So it's important, I think, for them to be in the classes.
Other,
I've had many questions about the independent study during the year, and I'm glad to see that the decision is made right up front. It's not going to be included, because I think what happens is, if you think you have the option for an independent study, then maybe you're not going to do that course in the summer that you're really interested in doing, but, and you can pursue your interest, but you thought you might be able to do it as part of getting your credits for high school because of the independent study. So if it's known right up front, then those decisions are made by the students and their families, and that's important. It is still a high school. It's not, we're not at college yet, where you can pursue just every single thing that you want. We offer a lot of electives, so I'm just glad you're making it clear up front. I think that that's very important.
thank you.
Mr. Murray, I would also say too, just to add, that I think if students have a strong interest in a particular area, then that's something that they can talk to you or a teacher in that particular subject area about, and maybe we do add a class, But, I think that it has to go through you.
go ahead, Jeff.
This is the old dean and former dean. With the unexcused absence, did I read further in the handbook that any work on that day they don't get credit for? Is that still in place?
That currently is still in place.
That's still in place, so there's not additional points taken?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
Exactly.
okay.
Just, I think a correction and then a question. On page 11, under extracurricular activity fee, did we drop that to 50?
We did.
Oh,
It's
good.
listed as 100, so.
Oh, thank you.
Make note of that.
That's exciting news.
I'm just conferring with Joanna for 1 second.
I did look back in the notes in the budget.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yeah.
And we
That's excellent. We'll
I
make that
didn't
change.
bring my budget book with
Yeah.
me. Is that for the high school and the middle
Yeah,
school?
we dropped it down because the middle school is already at
The
50.
high school was, I know the
Yeah.
middle school was at 50.
Yeah.
I remember we dropped the high school. I just didn't know if we went from 100 to 75 or to 50.
11.
But it looks like we went to 50.
Think so.
The correct number.
It was 50.
Thank you. That's really, parents will be very happy to hear that. That's so
And then the
cool.
other question is, what if any change on the grade point average chart? What happened there?
So the grade point average, the 4.7 scale is coming out. That was only for last year's seniors. The last year's freshmen, sophomores, and juniors were on a 5.0 scale, and the incoming freshmen, everyone's 5.0 now. We just had to phase out the current seniors for sanity's sake, because kids were already, they'd already done their schools and colleges, and to change it midstream on them while they're applying would have been tough.
Okay, so that was that other chart that's kind of blanked out there?
Yeah, so that's gonna come out.
Okay, I was wondering what was in there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Has it already been recalculated for everybody?
Yes, correct. Yep. It's all been done. It was, we were able to bifurcate that for seniors last year, and then everyone's 5.0 and everyone's 5.0 only.
And this will make it easier when they apply to colleges.
Yeah, we'll have almost the same scales as all the surrounding towns around us, especially our DART schools, which all were 5.0. Some went to 6.0, which I don't understand, but that's crazy.
All right, anything else people have on this?
Good job.
No? Okay, we'll take a motion.
I move that I move that the school committee approve the Chelmsford High School Handbook for the school year 2021 and 2022.
Second.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Zero. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hey,
Thanks, Steve,
good
for
luck at the
coming.
beginning of the year. It's exciting.
You too, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Give everyone my best.
Okay, latest. Okay. Okay, so next up is update to facility condition.
Yep, so this is a brief update for you. At the last school committee meeting, Joanna had prepared a little memo to just talk about the timeline for the RFP solicitation that we had put out Thank you, Steve. And in the end, at the closing date, we ended up only having one proposer, or one vendor submit a proposal. It was Durham Whittier Architects, which was the group that had done the original study with us. We reviewed their regular proposal, their cost proposal, and it was in line with what we were looking for. So I would recommend that the school committee vote to approve us entering into a contract with Durham Whittier Architects in the amount of $75,000. I've requested that your attorney's office prepare the contract document. We just don't have it yet. But if you would want to take that type of an action, we can get the balls in play here. And then that work will actually begin probably right after Labor Day as the school year begins. And we're looking for about a 5-month process. So we want to start in September. We want to have a good draft report by early January, and then be wrapping things up by February vacation. So this is the same detailed report we had provided to you at the last meeting, the same scope of services. So that's what will be incorporated into the contract document.
And this will be covered by grant funding?
Yeah, this is one of the ESSER grants, was going to pay for this.
Great. All right, any questions? All right, we'll let Donna finish.
I move that the school committee approve authorization to enter into a contract with Durham Whittier Architects for the purposes of an update to the facility conditions and district-wide master plan at the cost of $75,000.
Very well done.
That was
All right.
excellent.
Any additional comments, questions? All right, we'll vote. Donna?
Aye.
Jeff? Maria?
Aye.
Aye. Great. All right, next thing on the agenda was school committee self-evaluation. So in the packet is a summary of the self-evaluations that everybody sent to me. So those at home, we basically, as a committee, we kind of rated ourselves in a number of different areas, including governance, operations, member relationships, community relationships, et cetera, as either strongly agree or don't agree that we're meeting those standards. And I think for the most part, we find is that most people seem to feel like we're doing a pretty good job in most of those areas. I mean, a couple of things we've noted is the strategic plan. You know, we've talked about that in the past, how kind of got put on the back burner, and it's something we're going to start trying to work back towards this year. But other than that, I mean, most of the categories were either strongly agree or agree. And then we had a nice, I think, a little summary that I got from one of the members. So I'll just quickly read that because I think it does kind of sum up how the year went for us as a committee. It says, since March of 2020, the school committee's focus has been on supporting the school district's administration, staff, students, and families in issues related to COVID. It was a very stressful time in which many serious decisions needed to be made regarding educational practices and the safety of our staff and students. Although we did not always agree, every member of the committee keeps the needs of our staff and students at the forefront of the decision-making process. I believe every member has been thoughtful, compassionate, and diligent in doing their research as we navigated unprecedented times. When COVID initially became a serious issue, our focus shifted from our typical duties. As time has gone on, we have been able to achieve a balance of dealing with COVID and attending to the oversight of the district needs. I think we need to continue to maintain that balance as we move forward. Okay, so I thought that was very, very well stated. I'll give credit to Donna for that particular statement. So I think, this is a good kind of jumping off point. I think the next item we're going to talk about is a workshop, that possibility. I think this is good data to share with the presenters for those workshops. So you can kind of get a feel for where the committee feels they're at this point. So if anybody has any other comments or anything else they want to add at this point? No? Okay, so thank you all for getting that in and for continuing to do a great job. So, all right, so that segues very nicely into school committee workshop.
Yes, so on this front, I had mentioned to you at the last meeting, I'd reached out to Rivas and Associates because a few districts in our area had facilitated sessions with that group where individuals have come in to work with school committees and administrations around relationships and goal setting and how you actually progress monitor the goals that you set. In talking to Bill Rivas, he'd recommended this Dr. Paul Ash, who I know of, obviously. He's a former retired local superintendent. At the tail end of his career, he was superintendent in Lexington. and he has a wide experience. I just listed his biography for you. But he really, by all accounts, the districts I've reached out to have really enjoyed working with him on these sessions. He was open to working with us and excited about the possibility of doing that. I think he would really facilitate a good workshop for us. And looking at dates in September, because I think we want to do this sooner than later before we get too deep into the school year, because we're going to have a lot of different projects going on. He was available on Tuesday, September 28th. So I know like the first and third meetings of the month, we have our regular work meetings. If you're available that last Tuesday in September, we could book him and then come and actually have a work session with him that evening. I suggested we start around 6 o'clock on normal time, and it will be about a 2.5 to 3 hour session with him. And then districts oftentimes will do that kind of first session, and then maybe 6 months or a year later, revisit it based on work that's taken place, have them come in to do a different session. But, you know, I think if we kind of got our feet wet with one, we'd get a sense for what it's like working with him and some of his experiences. I think it'd be worthwhile. So he is available. We can contract through Rebus to have him come in and facilitate with us. Just want to run that date by you and make sure that you are on board.
What's everybody think? That sound like a
Sounds good.
good plan? I think, yeah, based on his biography and the fact that we had other districts around have used him and been very happy with the work, I think that would be a good activity for us to be involved with, and then, you know, that'll help us also in coming up with our own goals for this coming up year and all that, so.
Okay.
Any other thoughts?
Just should we be looking at his book before? Do we need his book for this?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I will talk to him ahead of time. Once we confirm this, he'll reach out, and he'll want to probably get a little bit of data about the district, so I'll see what he gives me for a list of things to provide to him. And at that point in time, I'll let him know if he has any kind of like homework for us to do before the session. I can report back that to you at the next meeting. I'm not sure if we have to for that opener, or if that would come as kind of continued work afterward, but I'll find out for you.
28th work for everybody? Yeah. Yes? Calendar?
Yes,
Okay.
it's very good.
All right, well, thank you. Yeah,
Excellent.
good
Thank you.
Arrange that, that'd be great. All right. What we're all here for tonight.
Yeah,
Turn to
no,
school planning.
I think this is an important topic, and Peggy is here as well. Peggy's our school nurse coordinator, for those who haven't seen Peggy. We saw a lot of Peggy last year. But Peggy, if you want to come on up to the table, you're welcome to present from up there. If you wanted to bring your plug, if you need to
Right,
plug
yeah,
in,
there's a
you
plug
can
right
do
there
that
if you
too.
need charger.
Probably just.
Okay, totally up to you. So one of the topics I know everyone's, you know, very eager and a little anxious about the start of the school year for next week. So this is a great opportunity tonight to talk a little bit about, as a district, how we're ready, we're prepared, we're excited for the start of the school year. We do know that there's some uncertainty this fall, like there was last fall when the year got going. But as has been mentioned previously, I think we really stepped up to the plate last year and did about the absolute best that we could have, given the circumstances. And we're really looking forward to putting a good program in place again for this year. That one of the comments previously, certainly keep safety and everyone's health and well-being at the forefront of the decision-making process. And at the same time, also balancing the need to return to more normal, full-time, in-person school. So I know that there have been, you know, committee members have received, I've received several emails and questions and concerns. We've put together an initial FAQ document. We're starting a second one with just some of the repetitive questions that come up so that we can share that at the end of the week in a follow-up correspondence. But we tried to put a lot of the information into tonight's presentation. So we're going to touch a little bit on some of the curriculum and learning aspects of what the school year is going to look like and how we're going to approach it, what our plan for that work is. And then we're going to talk about some of the protocols and procedures to keep us safe over the course of the year. And then just some odds and ends about how the school day is going to run, just based on some of the questions that we received. So I do think if people are watching at home, I think they're going to get a good flavor for how we're approaching the school year. There is certainly still, you know, work to be done. I'm sure there's going to be many more questions to come. Our school-based staff always do a very good job of interacting with their students and staff to answer questions. We're going to try to provide that district perspective as well. But I'm hoping people get a lot of their answers after we do this presentation this evening. So this is going to be a little bit of a kind of a three-person presentation. There'll be parts that I'll lead, Linda will lead, Peggy will. I figured at the end of the presentation, because if we do have the opportunity to kind of go through the whole presentation, I think they'll get a good snapshot. Then we can kind of open it up and have a little bit of a dialogue, a discussion, and answer any other questions that you may have. but we're hoping to have addressed a lot of them in the presentation. So I'm first going to turn it over to Dr. Hirsch to walk us through a little bit of the curriculum instruction assessment roadmap for the year and how we're going to approach learning.
Sure, thank you. So this is obviously, like everything else, it's going to evolve as we go along, but we had an opportunity to just kind of sit back and reflect of like, what is it that we actually do? And what is it that we need to do as students come back to school? And hopefully in the next few slides, I'll be able to capture some of the things that we already have in place and some newer items that we're looking into. One of the things that we did have a chance to go through was the guidance document from DESE. They talk about acceleration rather than remediation, and they talk about this phased-in plan. The good news is, we do a lot of these things, so it was nice of them to put this lovely document together to share and let us reflect. But it was really exciting to know that Chelmsford already does a lot of these things, so it was both validating and also refreshing to see that we have some good processes in place. So like I said, it's a phased process, so as we go through it, you'll see that we're talking about, obviously, first steps, which is looking at students and families, how do we connect with them, how do we bring them back into school, looking at student information that we currently have before we receive more information. Also, how do we collect all of our data, have the dates, progress monitor students as they go through the school year, any adjustments that need to be made, and professional development that needs to be provided, as well as some additional supports that we've been looking into. So first things first, how do we connect with our families? We are fortunate enough to have a lot of different programs. Each school has their own flavor on these different programs, but there's lots of meets and greets that happen, especially at the elementary level. Here you'll see pictured, there's Dr. Lang along with Diana Fullreader and Donna Omobono, the principal and assistant principal of Center Elementary School. They go and visit all the new kindergarten students that come to that school, provide them with a book and just a friendly hello, here we are, this is who we are kind of people, and it's very nice. You jump in the car with Diana, you never know where you're gonna go. And you show up at people's houses and they're just excited, the kids are excited, their siblings get a chance to see some of the people in the schools, even though they may or may not be in school. So some of these exciting things that happen are great. There are excellent mentoring programs, especially at the high school level, where we make sure that all those students have some type of connection and that they get into the school ahead of time. And then just in general, student visits for they've been having play dates at the elementary level for the different grade levels, student tours by grade levels, extra tours available for parents to go through. One of the things that I noticed in a conversation with Dr. Parks over at Parker is that he was seeing more of an influx of his 7th and 8th graders coming in for the tours instead of just mostly 5th graders and some 6th graders that haven't been there, because some of these kids started off their 5th grade year and then a year and a half went by and suddenly they're in 7th grade. That's a huge jump for these kids. They didn't even get a chance to go to the other side of the building. So allowing those students to actually come in and recruiting them to come in, so it just gave us a chance to think back, like, okay, what else could we do for our 7th graders and maybe possibly 8th graders that just feel like they haven't been in school enough to really know their school anymore. The other piece, and I obviously at the last meeting, I went over a lot of our benchmark data. So we do have a lot of benchmark data available, but if you notice, I bolded a couple of things under grades and attendance. Now, not that these are not important things that we kind of monitor, but I think we have to put a special effort into this year, especially the attendance piece. How can we make sure that kids are coming back to school and staying in school? There was a lot of missing of students when they were remote. You'd see a ceiling. We didn't know if there was a student underneath that ceiling. A lot of screens that went off, things like that. So these kids are in some routines that we have to undo. So a lot of efforts have to go into just monitoring that attendance piece and then even just their grades. A lot of things may have been forgiven as they went along. However, those grades are a big indicator, and they go along with placement as well for students. So even though we have our iReady data, our DIBELS, RAN, assessments, you name it, teacher records, we do really have to make sure we put some special emphasis towards the grades and attendance and just monitor that kids are coming back into routine, which kind of goes back to that connection piece, picking up the phone, talking to families, finding out what's going on. Again, things that schools do, but I think it's going to take an additional effort and even more people to do so. And then collecting that data. So obviously, we have our assessment calendar, which goes up to grades 8, so that teachers know when they're going to be looking at those assessments, when they're having those data meetings, when they're going to have discussions, and what changes are going to be made. But in that assessment calendar, we had some long conversations around our kindergarten students, right? This is their first piece of school. And what has happened in the past with some of our data points for them is that we've waited to get them acclimated to school. So, walking down the hallways, finding their classroom, going to lunch. However, what we found in our benchmark data for iReady specifically, and some of the other ones, was that, we were waiting till December. That's a little bit too late. So we want to incorporate them back in with our grades 1 through 8 students and have them benchmark at the beginning of the year, because we're going to really need to have a good handle on where those students are, because some of that data gets skewed as we go along. So after long discussions with everybody, we're going to bring our kindergartners back into the fold, where most school districts do take a look at their kindergarten data, along with, we also have the DIBELS and the RAN data. We're also incorporating our grades 2 students into DIBELS and RAN for this school year as the school year goes along, to just have that extra eyes on them and not waiting for the typical student to be walking through the door. We need to make sure that we have the right information and we're putting them in the right groups as we go along. One other thing that we're looking into is actually having this standardized assessment for our high school students, grades 9, 10, and 11 in ELA and mathematics. There's a lot of programs that have recently come out that meet our needs. So as a smaller team, we've got together to just be able to look at what it has to offer us for informational purposes only, not the building block piece, not that they have to go and do the lessons from these programs. They're literally high school benchmarks, because a lot of high school data does not, a standardized assessment doesn't really come to us unless it's in the form of MCAS, AP, or SAT. So this would give us some formative data to look at our current high school students beyond the teacher assessment, beyond the unit assessment, or the common assessment that is given at the high school years, for ELA and mathematics only at this point. And then we have purchased additional programming. iExcel is another program that allows for social studies, and there's a science component too that we're looking into, but definitely for social studies, to give the students an extra boost as they go along through their regular classes, to allow for those students grades 7 through 12 to have some additional support in social studies specific, and then we'll investigate what the science one looks like as well. So again, extra tools for teachers to use when they're doing either small group instruction, if they need to pull smaller groups, or kids need some extra practice. A lot of these programs have like extra practice to them. So these are some of the things that we are looking at as a district, and also making sure we have all the data necessary to make informed decisions on the kids as they walk through the door. And then this is, typically, we always go through our pacing guides and make adjustments based on data results. So that's, nothing new to us, as well as power standards. So what are the have-tos? Where are the gaps that kids are missing information? But then as we've been going along, we're adding the second step curriculum, which is a social emotional learning curriculum, to grades 5 through 8. This is done in Fidelity in grades K through 4 right now. The program is completely digitized at this point. And through grant funding and through working with both Katie Sims and our new SEL coordinator, Shannon Bischoff, we're able to bring this up to grades 5 through 8 with very specific lessons for teachers to implement, and be able to make sure that our students have some common language and that we can assess where they currently are emotionally as well as academically. As you know, we're doing a lot of district-wide PD on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which falls under that social emotional umbrella. Our admin team has already started that work. We just met this last week, and with the consultants that you're also going to be working with as a school committee, and then as well as going into the schools on our professional development days. So to make sure, again, we're addressing those social emotional health of students. And then we are doing the continuation of the literacy curriculum adoptions for grades 5 and 6. They have a new program, they're receiving their PD, and will continue to receive PD throughout the school year, so that we have that continuum, grades K through 6, with solid reading, foundational skills, and writing skills. And then some other things that are out there additionally that we're looking at. So through our grant funding, we're able to hire more interventionists. Some of the interesting things, even with those ESSER grants, is that you actually can supplant, okay, with your people, so you can add more people in. So we've already posted for a lot of those interventionist positions so that we can put more of them at the middle school level too, as well as elementary. And then we actually have met with one of the vendors. There's a lot of these new programs that are coming out, and there's one that's very intriguing and interesting, where there's like on-demand tutoring services for parents after school hours and also during the school day. So as a classroom teacher, you could, again, be working in small groups and have students working with a tutor right there in your classroom, but then after school for parents, whether it's 24/7, a lot of these places, they get home from school, they have to start their math, it's 9 o'clock at night, no one's available, nobody really knows how to help in this process. This online demand tutoring with a live person would be available to help students, walking them through their content area, because they're content area specialists. So that's, exciting. Again, we can take a look at our grant funding to support something like this, but what person wouldn't want an additional support when you can't help your kids, or your kids need somebody other than you to get that support? And then, obviously, we're looking into extended school day learning opportunities. We do that for our L students now, and we will continue to do that through our Title III grant funding. But we will also look to see what else we can provide. As you know, we tried to work on some summer school stuff this year. We need bodies, we need people to do that. So we're going to try and look into the best ways to, A, make sure we have the staff to do it, and then B, make sure we have a place for students to get there. One of the issues we tend to run into is middle school and high school, we have like late run buses, but then how are we getting the elementary school kids home? So we have to investigate a little bit more about that, but these are the ongoing conversations that we have to just keep boosting the students and moving them forward throughout the school year and getting them back into the routine of what school looks like. So that's for the curriculum piece. I know that we're going to move on and talk about the school health and safety information. So if you want me to advance the slides and go through there, or.
Yeah, there are a couple like natural stops during the presentation, so I don't know if anyone had questions specific to like curriculum and instruction or whatnot. This would be a good time for that.
Go ahead, Marie.
Okay, so in terms of the interventionists and adding them in, I went on our site just to see about open positions and so on. We have quite a bit going on in terms of hiring and positions out there open. How is that going? And do we, right now, do we have on board the number already that we want in terms of interventionists, or how are we doing on that?
So we have just recently posted. Typically, a lot of our interventionists come back, so we already know who is already interested in coming back at that point. So no, we don't have them all on board. What typically happens is the hiring happens now, and then by mid-September, we have them all on board, and then we go through scheduling, and they start by the last week in September, first week in October-ish, where they start actually going in and pulling students. Because right now, when students are coming in, teachers are going over expectation, rules, routines, making sure we have everybody in the right class at the right place. So the first 3 weeks of school, typically we wouldn't have interventionists pulling students or pushing into the classroom for support. That typically happens the last week in September to the first week in October, once everybody has established their routines and we know who has what, and we're collecting data on students, because when they come in, they start their placement data. So once we have that, we'll know who we are actually working with at that point.
Okay,
So we anticipate to have the right amount. It's just going to take a few weeks to do that and then onboard them.
so for the way we're envisioning the interventionists, is at every level, or is it elementary and middle school?
Elementary and middle. So we've always had them at the elementary level, with one school that did not qualify for Title I funds. But now that we actually have in place some additional tutors money, and we have these other grants. So all 4 of the elementary schools will have their interventionists / tutors. And then middle school was where they didn't really have many of them. So now we can actually shift some of the funding and get middle school interventionists.
Okay, because you had said the assessments will be done earlier so that we can get this going earlier. One additional question in terms of additional people and staffing in order to be able to allow teachers, the classroom teacher, to maybe be able to monitor the students individually, help them get to achieve whatever they need to individually with that classroom teacher. Would any of these additional bodies be actually in the classroom so that the teacher then has more time themselves to do what they need to do? How are we envisioning that? We're keeping,
Typically, the interventionists are doing remediation skills, so they're pulling them and doing small group instruction. So those teachers would then be able to attend to the students that may not need that additional boost. So let's just say I have 20 kids in my classroom. I have about 4 of them that are not grasping a skill. After I've retaught it, I've tried it a different way. I would refer them to the interventionist to then close the gap of that skill, but then keep the rest of my classroom, the 16 kids that are there.
Okay.
And then I would have, I mean, technically, additional time to be working with those students. So they're not necessarily there to be physically in the classroom to relieve the teacher to go attend to other things. They would be pulling the students to work on specific skills. We also have other people that work, we have co-teaching that happens in our schools. So sometimes some of the classrooms have a special educator and a regular ed teacher, both in the classroom teaching, as well as our reading specialists sometimes push in and pull out based on the needs of the students. So there's a lot of personnel that are in and out of the classrooms. Did you want to say something?
No, I think part of Maria's question too is though, does the interventionist physically go into the classroom and say, work with the group of, the teacher with 20 kids? They might be working in the classroom with the 4, while the
They could.
teacher is working with the other 16 on something else.
It could happen in the classroom, it could happen right outside the classroom. It's about spacing, it's about the students and the needs of the students.
yeah, because one of the things I often get comments on is, if students are pulled out of my classroom and they're going to go to the reading specialist or to whatever, okay, which I think is very important in some cases. But if they're continuously being pulled out, first of all, we have students returning that haven't had a sense of an entire class or socializing with everybody and so on. And if we're continuously pulling them out and they're not there as a group to get used to that group and working within that group setting, that's hard for the students too. I mean, they've got to acclimate again to socializing and being with each other and so on. We've had a little bit of it at the end of the year, but not with the entire team. About 20% of our students were not here physically. So that's one of the comments I've heard throughout, that it would be very helpful in some instances to actually bring somebody who can just relieve, be monitoring everybody who's okay, and the teacher has a bit more time to do a small group or be with a smaller group, but still within the classroom setting. So those are some of the things I've heard as comments in terms of intervention. And I'm wondering if that was thought through.
Well, yeah, and the teachers work hand in hand with the interventionists. There's lots of conversations that happen. So usually that decision of how they're going to receive some type of skill gap has already happened with the classroom teacher, because that's how an interventionist works. So it's separate from like special ed, any pull-out or reading specialist. This is usually a conversation between the teacher and the interventionist as to how they would like to see that happen. So if that teacher would prefer that group to be receiving some type of support in the classroom, then they would have already made that decision.
Okay, and so one more question for you for this whole thing is in terms of the high school. So this is elementary and middle, we've addressed how we're going to address some of the problems or the gaps in learning and so on. How about at the high school? What's going to happen if a student needs the extra assistance and so on, other than maybe the on-demand tutoring services? What else is available to them?
Well, I mean, I think that's usually that's when we have to address, after we kind of assess where they're at, that's when the teachers are usually making their adjustments in their pacing guides as well. Well, they use syllabi at the high school level. And then also deciding which standards are missing and where they actually have to focus in on that, and then provide more lesson planning around that. That's usually around the teachers. There's no pull-out per se for high school students, because it's usually just not the process. how it goes. It would only be for like students that are maybe scheduled in a block for that. So right now, there's no additional support of pulling students out. It would just be more of monitoring where they currently are and pushing them forward through the teachers, through the different curriculum that we have, and also providing them with the services if they actually qualify for services.
Other questions on academics, Donna?
So are we hiring more interventionists above and beyond our typical Title I interventionists?
That's our hope.
Okay. Where are we going to teach second step in the middle school and high school?
So at the middle school or the elementary school, I'm sorry?
No, elementary.
Yeah, middle school,
and high.
so they have made a schedule, and because we sat down and talked about that, so we do a couple of things at middle school. One of them is like extended homeroom, because these are like 15 to 20-minute
Right.
lessons.
I'm sorry,
They're
not
quick
high
hits.
school. I apologize.
Yeah, high school
only
does
middle
not
school.
have
I
that. Yeah,
apologize, yes.
middle school only has that, so we sat down just to make sure that one class wasn't hit all the time, because the students rotate, not the classes, right? High school, the classes rotate, not the students, well, the students rotate with them, but, so they have made a schedule, they sat down and made a schedule to put these in specific dates. There's only about 20 to 27 lessons for the entire school year, so they've either decided to extend their homeroom or make sure that it happens in first period every day, and to make sure that it's not the same class for that first period. So like the English teacher isn't always doing it, or the social studies, or they're missing a specialist. So they sat down and, thoughtfully looked at where these should fall into place, and then embedded the 20 to 27 lessons based on the grade level, and extended the homerooms.
And then the only other two things that I was wondering about, with regards to the progress monitoring, so I know this plan is for the 2021-2022 calendar school year. And that some of the things that we're looking at purchasing, would they extend beyond this year? Will we evaluate that at the end of this year,
Yeah, if it's
Is
something
this
that
really just I guess, I'm sorry, is this just like a focused approach for this particular year, and then we will evaluate?
for some of these items, yes. I mean, we have to make sure that they're useful. You're not gonna just keep getting an item.
Right.
And plus, we only purchase things for a year, and everything, even if it's something we're like beholden to, like we all use iReady, so that's a program that we've had. No matter what, we can only purchase for 1 year anyways with a school budget. So we'll evaluate some of these programs. So like, take that online tutoring. If that's not what we expect it to be, or the usage isn't there, then we wouldn't use it. What's helpful is that we do have funding through our grants to do this, and some of our grants require us to spend money in some of these areas. So it would behoove us to look at these areas directly and try some of these products out. And if it's something we would like to keep for additional years, we could, investigate how that fits into our budget beyond a grant.
Okay.
But our grants are pretty meaty enough for us to at least run these for a couple of years if we want to really try it out.
And then what are we doing about MCAS this year?
You could contact Commissioner Riley, and I'm sure he will be more than happy. They've already set the dates. They're planning on doing MCAS as they normally do.
Okay.
But that's what we will end up doing unless something changes drastically. So we will just prep like we normally do.
So just, we're back to the normal
Back
MCAS
back
schedule?
to the normal, where MCAS the way we've always known it, unless something changes, to be continued.
And then the only other thing I wanted to add is, this is a lot of stuff, and I think it's fantastic. But it sounds like it's also going to be a lot of PD for the teachers. And I do worry about that. I think it's necessary, but I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that they're also coming back now at full capacity, still under the stress of returning to school, COVID, doing the readjusting that our students are doing in many ways. And I just want to make sure that, like I said, that we're kind of sensitive to how we're rolling these things out. I don't want our teachers to be buried in the first month of the school year. So, I mean, I don't know what the PD schedule looks like, but it is a concern.
Yeah, it's already been planned out. We actually sat down and we'll just make sure that everybody has the days that they need, and also through department time that they might have, to make sure that it's not just, it's a front-loaded dump. It's
Right.
throughout the school year.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Two things. One is the technology that we had last year, the cameras in the classroom, is that all gone this year, right? Because we're not going to do the
Yeah, we're
remote.
not doing remote.
Right.
So, or
Not gonna use
synchronous.
any of that, okay.
They're still in our schools.
Right, they
but
are,
we're not-
yes.
We're not, that's not an option for
Okay.
students.
And the second thing, and this has kind of more to do with this, the next slide, which I think probably goes with the academic section rather than the school health and safety, is in terms of enrollment, did we get a lot of kids that last year chose to homeschool or private school come back?
They came back, so they're re-registering. I don't have the exact number because they're kind of dwindling in, but we had sent out notices to remind them to come back and actually re-register, like, don't just show up. However, we anticipate some people to show up and they will be sent to re-register. So I'll get, for the next meeting, I can tell you exactly how many are staying as homeschool compared to how many are returning.
Okay, so these numbers could grow, we could get more.
Yeah, if you remember, we had about 107, so I went from like, say, 35 to 107 homeschool kids. So it's that section from 35 to 107 that we anticipate coming back or not. So it's not a huge swing, and that's, many of them were at the elementary level. We have a few middle school and a few high school sprinkled in there, but if anything, you would see the uptick at the elementary level of those students returning, but many of them have already returned. We check daily on X2 just to make sure that they've re-registered. And we
Any
take them off.
concerns about class numbers then at the elementary level with?
I don't think so.
No, I mean, when we looked at, and if we just jump ahead to the student enrollment slide, this was just as of last Friday. I had just pulled the data per grade level per school. And if you recall, last year, we were kind of teetering around like 4,900 students, and we're usually a little over 5,000, so we're kind of back to normal. So most of the homeschool students who kind of left for the year, or the students who enrolled in the private parochial schools, are back in these numbers. This is kind of our baseline to start the year. You're going to see a little bit of enrollment. I mean, we still have families coming in every day to enroll, so that's going to continue. But I think the number that we really were looking at was at the kindergarten level, because that's kind of our number we're not 100% certain on. We had added the extra class at Center and Byam. So they're going to have the 5 sections. And then we're remaining with the 4 sections at South Row and Harrington. And for us, that makes sense. They're in line with what we normally would do. If we have a school that's kind of creeping closer to 100 students, high 90s, then we start to kind of flag it, and we look about potentially having to add a 5th section. But both South Row and Harrington at this point in those particular grades would be grades we would start with 4. But I'm glad we moved Center and Byam at the time that we did, so that they could have their staff kind of locked in and scheduled. So I think we're really in good shape on that front. Any of our other grade levels that already had, say, a 5th section, those rolled. So we continued them. We didn't cut back on any sections. So anyone who had, like if you had 5 first grades last year, we assumed that those students were going to come back, even if the numbers had dipped a little last year. So they're going to have now 5 second grades. So we're accounting for that. So no, our elementary numbers, when I produce like the October 1st report for you, will look very good.
Okay. All right.
One other question on this aspect of things on the plan. At the beginning, you had talked about, Dr. Hirsch, you had spoken about the fact that, student and family connections and those things. That's the social, the emotional component of life too. But is there any, and I like this, the report that you're giving us and the things that we want to accomplish this year and what we're going to be providing us support. What's the plan in terms of the social emotional component of it? Are we having additional guidance hours? Are we providing things to our staff as well? What are we doing in that department?
Well, I think, again, do you want me to jump in? Yep. That's one that we have to get people back into the buildings to kind of see where they're at. I think we're on very solid footing for the work that we've done over the last number of years with all of our SEL work. We were able to hire the new SEL coordinator. They're on board. They're making connections within the schools. But we've really got to get the staff and the students back full-time to be able to assess where any of those needs are. We know we have a very strong SEL program at the elementary school level, and that's been very successful. So I'm happy to see that that's now kind of growing up to the middle school level. We'll have to give that time to take it. It'll be a multi-year process to really have that take off the way it has at the elementary school level.
Okay.
But we're starting the school year fully staffed with regard to all of our counselors and psychologists and social worker that we have. So we're fully staffed and ready for the students coming back to us. as we identify any needs or gaps in services when they come back. Our coordinator will be able to work with us, our principals, assistant principals will be able to work with us and figure out if we need to reallocate any resources to fill those.
Okay.
But I'm very confident in the program that we have, that the kids are going to be in good footing when they come back in.
Anything else in the academic program? Okay, so moving on is health and safety.
Yep, so we just kind of covered that slide for you on the enrollment. So like I said, I think we're in very good footing on that front. What we're going to do is kind of walk you through the procedures and protocols that we're going to have in place to start the school year. And these are primarily based on Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, as well as the Massachusetts Department of Public Health guidelines. And, one of the things that's kind of guiding all of our work and our decision-making for the fall is that we are going to have all schools returning full-time to in-person learning, 5 days a week, 5 full days. We're going to have as much of a normal routine as we normally would have in schools with schedules and all of our kids coming back with these layered mitigation strategies to keep everyone healthy and safe as we go. On the mitigation strategies, thank you, that we're going to have in place for this year. Again, this is very similar to last year, but we're going to ask our students and staff to make sure that they're self-screening. If a student or a staff member is not feeling well, they should stay home. They should not come into work on those days. And this is going to be messaging that we're going to continue to put out and enforce with individuals. We're going to continue with our hand washing, making sure that we're doing proper hand hygiene. We are going to have masks be worn by all staff and students in the public school buildings during the school day. This afternoon, I know that was already our policy to end the last school year, and obviously we had talked about continuing and opening up the school year with that policy in effect. Today, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education actually granted the commissioner the ability to have a statewide mask mandate, which he did actually enact. So we were doing this anyway, but I think now you're going to see other school systems, obviously come on board, whether they wanted to or didn't want to, and have masking be in effect for the start of the school year. I haven't read all of the guidelines that came out today yet because it just happened this afternoon. But it's my understanding that at least through October 1st, all staff and students are going to have to mask while in the buildings, and that the commissioner put out a metric for communities to look at in partnership with Department of Public Health, where after some date in October, and again, we've got to get into the school year to really kind of see what's going to happen within our community, but to put out some dates to take a look at how your community is responding. What are your positivity rates? What are your vaccination rates? The threshold of potentially like hitting a school with 80% vaccination rate, as long as your community doesn't have significant spread within it, that you could then apply for a waiver to be able to remove masks. These are conversations that we're going to have in September. I want to be able to read the full guidance, but I do know that all communities are going to have to mask at least between now and October 1st. So we know we're all starting off the school year on that front. Students have to wear masks on buses at all times. This was actually a Department of Transportation guidance. So we knew that was always going to happen, whether we had a masking policy or not in Chelmsford. So everyone is going to have to wear masks. We're going to talk a little bit later about continuing with our voluntary COVID-19 pool testing. That'll be a weekly pool testing for those who volunteer to be part of that. So we're going to touch base on that as one of our mitigation strategies. Working with Brian Curley in facilities, we're going to increase again our cleaning of our schools. We're going to add some extra contracted cleaners during the school day to go around and clean some of the high-touch surfaces that was really successful last year, as well as one evening, I believe Wednesdays and Saturdays, kind of going in and doing some extra deep cleaning of the building. So that's going to continue. Over the course of this whole last school year, we're going to touch on later in the presentation as well, we did, working with the town, some significant improvements to HVAC systems in the buildings, changing out filtering, upgrading systems where need be. So again, we'll touch base on that. And then the last strategy that we have is really encouraging, I do, and I know the committee does, eligible individuals, anyone 12 and older, to become vaccinated. I definitely think that's going to be one of our biggest strategies to eventually try to move out of the situation that we're in and be able to eventually someday take our masks off. So I think that's critical. But we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into some of these areas, and I'm going to actually ask Peggy, if you don't mind. Peggy's our coordinator for school nursing. If you could maybe start us off and talk a little bit about COVID symptoms and how we're going to be treating the staff and student pre-screenings to get the school year going. Just bring the microphone a little closer to you. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Well, it's nice to see everybody in person. I know it's been a long time, so it's great to be here to share with you and hopefully, answer your questions, and the people that are watching at home, hopefully they'll have, know that they're in good hands and that we do have a pretty comprehensive plan to return to school. So the COVID symptoms, essentially, they are the same as we've been hearing all along, with just a slight difference. So for this year, if you look at the first 4 symptoms that are bolded, fever of 100 or greater with chills or shaking chills, any sort of difficulty breathing, shortness of breath, if you experience a new loss of taste or smell, or if you experience muscle aches or body aches, those are sort of the primary or standalone symptoms. So if someone has experienced even one of those symptoms, we're going to request that they, recommend a COVID test, ask them to speak to their doctor, and they need to come back, with a negative test to show us that, those symptoms were in fact not COVID symptoms. For a cough, we would like you to get checked out if you have a cough and have a COVID test. However, if it is due to a known cause, such as a chronic cough, or you were diagnosed with bronchitis, then we wouldn't necessarily have you get a COVID test. And the next 5 symptoms, the sore throat, any of the 3 GI, gastrointestinal symptoms that are listed there, a headache, fatigue, nasal congestion, or runny nose, those symptoms, they need to be when in combination with other symptoms. So essentially, if you have a headache and that's all you're experiencing, as long as you don't have a fever, as long as you don't have a muscle ache, if it's just simply a sore throat, then you can, take care of it at home, but you don't necessarily need to get a COVID test. So those symptoms, when it says in combination, just means if you have only that symptom, then we don't require a COVID test. Go to the next slide. We can talk a little bit about the pool testing. We were pretty successful with our pool testing last year. I believe of 11,000, I don't have the exact number in front of me, we tested over 11,000 students and staff. And of those, we only had 7 come back positive. However, some of those were, it was where somebody had tested positive within the 90 days and they just kind of snuck in there where they should have tested it all. Another one was someone who had come to school and just didn't realize. So, but that's an incredibly small number. So the pool testing went well. And so I think a return to that is a good idea. And just to recap what pool testing is, it just involves combining several samples together, and then you test the entire group. And if that comes up negative, then everybody is negative. If one of the samples is positive, then that group would be positive, and then we'll test you individually. What the protocol is asking for is we invite unvaccinated school staff and students to participate in pool testing. It is not recommended for people who are vaccinated. They can participate, it's just not recommended that they do. And if you've tested positive within the past 90 days, we ask that you not participate, but then when the 90 days is up, we'd welcome you back to join in pool testing. And then we'll continue, what we'll do is we'll publish a weekly COVID-19 dashboard, so it would list the number of confirmed cases so that parents would have a good metric to see, were there any positive cases. As well as, we'll get into that a little bit later, but we will notify of a positive case in the classroom, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself.
Can I ask a question as we go along, or do you want to wait till the end?
Is it pertaining to pool testing?
It's about the pool testing.
Maybe at least just get through all the pool testing slides,
Okay.
just in case it gets answered, and then we can certainly do it before we move on to the next one.
Okay, so I kind of talked about this a little bit already. If the pool test result is negative, then everyone can assume that that entire group is good to be in school and they are negative. If one is positive of that sample, then we're going to presume that somebody in that group is positive, and then we will test them with the Binax now test, the rapid antigen test. And it did work out well. I was often notified the night before, so I was able to know, identify what school, the group that had tested where there was a positive, and before they even came into school, we would send the staff member or the student, whoever the participants in that pool, and catch them right as they were coming in, or before say, please come to the nurse's office at 7 a.m. or 8:30, whatever the time was, so that we weren't looking for them at 2 p.m. We were catching them first thing before they went to class. So that's what we will be doing moving forward, and it will be once a week. So once a week for the pool testing.
Okay, just a couple big kind of takeaways. So all the testing is done on site, all right? So no one has to leave the school. Before the end of the week, we'll be emailing home a consent form, so there'll be information about pool testing. People do need to actually sign up and give permission to pool test. If you don't consent and you don't fill out the form, then you cannot participate in pool testing. If by chance you don't sign up right away, it's a rolling admission. So you certainly can sign up at a later date to become part of the pool testing program, but you just aren't able to participate in the week that's going on at that point. So this will all be communicated to families by the weekend. They'll go in and actually give consent to participate in pool testing. As Peggy said, it's once a week. In the event that a pool comes back positive, and again, we didn't have many last year, that follow-up test is also done at the school level. So when the students come in, then you don't have to go to your own doctor to have the follow-up test done. If there was a pool of 8 samples that went to the lab and you had a positive pool, those 8 people are identified. When they report to school that next morning, they report to the nurse's office, we find them, and then they actually take a test right on site that within about 15 minutes, you get the result back. And we're able to identify who the positive person from the pool is, and the other 7 people can just go back to class. They're not actually a positive. But I just want to make sure everyone knows, number one, you have to consent. The forms are going to be going out by the end of this week. Rolling admission, if you don't want to do it right away, totally fine. You can sign up at a later date. We certainly encourage you to do it early. We'd rather get the pools to be as large as we can. But then all of the testing is done at the school level. People do not have to go to their own primary care or walk-in or anything like that for either the regular test or the follow-up test. So I just wanted to hit home on those points.
Okay.
Maria?
Just a question on the people, the individuals you're recommending be part of this pool test are the unvaccinated. Okay. What is the reasoning behind that? Why are vaccinated individuals don't have to participate or shouldn't participate?
I mean, they certainly can participate, but I think what the CIC Health is the entity that kind of develops the protocols and that gives direction with DESE, and that was the protocol that they developed. I believe they felt that the greatest risk to bring COVID into the schools were students and staff who were unvaccinated. Not that it can't happen, as we know with this breakthrough we're experiencing, but for the most part, by and large, it's unvaccinated people that are contracting this, and spreading it, so that we're really looking to, we really want to catch those people. But you can participate if you've been vaccinated. We just really want to reach out to those who are unvaccinated.
Okay.
Is the procedure going to be the same as last year in terms of like elementary school, they come to the classroom and high school kids report to a certain place?
That seemed to work well. With the high school, we had it at a central location, and that worked well, and the kids knew, and we sent reminders that they would report to a central location. It was the same location every week. At the middle schools, again, it was a central location. That worked well. With the little ones at the elementary, we sort of, some elementaries tried a central location, but sometimes it's like herding kittens at the younger levels. And it seemed to work better to have, it's a cart, we purchased some carts, and we literally went door to door, and it's fairly quickly, by the end of, June, after doing it from April until June, it does run, it's pretty smooth.
My concern, my greatest concern, of course, is the obvious that we've got, if we're saying, okay, it should be unvaccinated, and especially after a certain age, I am concerned about participation rates and whether people are just gonna volunteer to go ahead and go get pool tested, which is the purpose of this whole thing, is to get as many participating as possible. So if that distinction is made, that's the concern I would have. And if vaccinated do not skew it, and it's open to everyone, then, the participation rates may be different.
I mean, I think we kind of go on the recommendation or the guidelines that come from the
Absolutely.
state on this. And I think what they're trying to do is really target the students who are unvaccinated. If vaccinated individuals want to sign up, they certainly can. But the group, I think that they want to focus on really making sure that we're trying to capture and include in the pools are the unvaccinated.
Right.
But I do think a lot of our staff and students who participated last year, this was pre-vaccine or even a little bit after the vaccine, because we had staff that were vaccinated, say, in April, still continue to test, even though they didn't necessarily have to in May and June. So I still think you'll see some of that trend. I don't know, student-wise, because we're just going to start to kind of see how that's going to go. I think we had stronger participation at the lower grade levels, which I think is actually really important right now, because obviously grades K to 6, we really don't have vaccinated students. So we're really going to be putting a push on that, because you're going to have a lot of students in the same buildings. That is going to be a focus for us, but 7 to 12, who are vaccinated certainly still can participate. But if we are going to put our efforts into this program, I do think we should be focusing on the unvaccinated.
And we did find elementary was the highest participation rate in the pool testing.
Right.
Second to Parker and McCarthy, and then the high school had the lower participation rates.
Donnie, you had something?
Just so that we're clear, and so that people at home understand, the pool testing will show a positive for COVID in any of its variants, like the Delta virus, Delta variation.
So the pool test, the positive, it just says that you're positive for COVID. In order to, they're not testing for variants, they're just simply saying you're positive.
So you will show a positive?
You will show.
Okay, that's what I want to know. Okay, thank you.
One last thing, this pool testing and the Binax testing are still being paid for by the state?
Yeah, so the state agreed to pick up the cost of all the testing again for this year. So the pool testing that we'd be doing, the people coming out to the school to help administer it, even, say, driving the samples in, and then the follow-up Binax tests themselves, our staff have to perform them, but the equipment itself and the test itself is free, so we won't have to pay for that.
Great, thank you.
All right. If we shift for a second now into, close contact identification, I know this is something that we dealt with all last year. We hope we don't have positive cases. Inevitably, we will have a positive case at some point, staff or student in the school year. Again, I think we did a very good job of identifying them last year with our notifications and with our response protocols, because we really, in numbers, had very few compared to the number of students and staff we had in our buildings. And we did not see spread. We did not see, if we had an identified case within the classroom, we weren't seeing other staff or students become positive with the follow-up procedures that we had in place. And I think, again, we now have the mitigation strategy where at least some of our staff and students have had access to the vaccine. So I'm hoping that also this is another good step. But we do just want to walk through the new definition of a close contact, because now you do have the vaccine in play. Peggy, would you like to do this one, or do you want me to? It's up to you.
No, I can explain. So this is probably something where, is familiar. A close contact is defined as an individual who have been within 6 feet of a COVID-19 positive individual while indoors for at least 15 minutes during the 24-hour period. So close contacts who'd be exempt from a testing and quarantine protocol would be an asymptomatic, which means without symptoms, so symptom-free, fully vaccinated person would not be considered a close contact because they're vaccinated. So they would be exempt or not have to follow the testing and quarantine protocol. The classroom close contacts will be, if to be exempt, an individual who was exposed to a COVID-19 positive person in the classroom and they were spaced at least 6 feet apart would be exempt from the testing and protocol response because you haven't been within the 6 feet. So these are talking about just people who are going to be exempt from testing and quarantine. A bus close contact, individuals on the bus, they all need to be masked, the driver included and the students. So they would not be considered close contacts because they're on the bus, windows open with their masks on. They would not have to participate in testing or quarantine protocols because they're not considered close contact on the bus. And the fourth group who would be exempt from testing and quarantine protocols or is someone that had had COVID-19 within the past 90 days. That's kind of considered your immunity bubble, that if you've had COVID-19 within the past 90 days, you would not be considered a close contact, as long as you didn't have any symptoms and it's within your 90 days. So those are the four groups that would not be identified as a close contact. Is that?
With the classroom close contact,
Yeah.
since everyone's wearing masks, would that change that at all, or?
No, so it's the close contact, if you've been within 6 feet of someone, whether you had a mask on or a mask off, so irregardless of whether the mask was on or off, if you've been within 6 feet while indoors. So it's important to note that if you're outside, they just haven't seen, and that rationale is just because outside the transmission has been less likely. So they're saying if you're outside, even if your mask is off, you're not considered a close contact if you've been exposed to a positive case. But if you're indoors, within 6 feet of someone who has tested positive, then you would be a close contact.
Thank you.
And it's 6 feet, not 3 feet.
So I know DESE did go, did reduce it to 3. We're still saying the 6 feet because that's
Okay.
following along with.
So just because there is
PH.
confusion about this, so for continuity for us, we kept a 6-foot distancing all last school year. At some point during the school year, DESE actually said within the classroom setting, it could be 3 feet. To not be more confusing than we have to be, we're just recommending sticking with the 6 feet distancing that we had used last year. It really is not going to impact because, again, you have these people who are going to be not having to follow the protocol because of vaccine and things like this. I think our numbers are actually going to be less. We're also going to talk about even like the test and stay program a little bit later. So just to make it easy for everyone, we're just going to recommend the 6-foot distancing, even in the classroom, and not go into the 3 right now. I think it's one more layer that people just wouldn't.
So in a classroom, desks or seating may be 3 feet apart, but for close contact purposes and the definition, you're saying 6 feet.
Correct. So if yes, we would do like a radius of the desk, and anyone within a 6-foot area would be designated a close contact.
Okay.
And then we would have to see if they actually were vaccinated or not. There'll be a whole little procedure we have to go through.
So for the purpose of making this determination, because this has to be a call out by, I think, the nursing staff, is that, I don't know how you determine who gets notified. But for this purpose right here, excuse me, it would seem to me that at every level, you have to have assigned seating.
Yes, the teachers are going to be responsible like they were last year. So this is a continuation of what we did last year. They're going to have to keep track of the seating plan for their classroom and know who's sitting where. So that if we ever had a positive case, Peggy, the school nurse, would need to go in and work with the teacher to identify who is a close contact, who's within the 6 feet of those individuals.
Okay, so it's going to be up to the classroom teacher, no matter what classroom, including at the high school level, to know that at every class, this is where the student sits?
Yes, they're going to have to follow a
Okay.
seating chart like we did last year. A seating plan.
Donna, question?
So, I know we've had, just to back up a little bit, we've had a lot of the recommendations and guidelines are coming from multiple places.
Right.
And sometimes they almost seem to contradict each other. So let me give you an example, like, in the classroom, we have the 6-foot radius, but we don't have anything on the bus,
Correct.
but that doesn't make sense.
Because they're saying it's inside a school building. All right, so inside a physical building is where they're identifying close contacts. Outside of a school building, they're saying no close contacts.
Help me understand how that makes sense.
Because students are typically, this is the rationale, students are typically, say, not on a school bus for a long period of time, coming back and forth from school. So when we say school bus, I'm also talking more like the big yellow school buses.
Right.
There could be a separate circumstance for, like, say, a small special ed vehicle that's doing like a longer trip, something like that, but we're just talking the regular buses. I actually don't know off the top of my head what our average bus run is now, but it's a relatively short bus run coming back and forth to school with the windows open and that constant airflow that you don't get in the classroom because the classroom isn't moving. But the studies have shown when you even have the window open an inch or two, the amount of air, fresh air that's circulating through that bus and recirculating, we're not seeing any transmission on school buses. So that's really why they're not identifying close contacts outside or in school buses. And, I mean, to that point, too, we are, I want to acknowledge your first point. We've got information from DESE, from Department of Public Health, from American Academy of Pediatrics, from, CIC, all these different groups. It is a little bit of a hodgepodge. I think we're primarily following the state guidance from DESE and Department of Public Health. That is the most relevant to our local context, because Massachusetts certainly is different than California or Oregon or Florida or, West Virginia. I mean, it is just a little bit different. So primarily, we are following that. I think when it came to the whole 6 feet recognition, for consistency's sake, it just, to me, made more sense to go with what we had all last year because we were following the 6-foot distancing. And even in the classroom where DESE says you can go to 3, I just think that would be too confusing to people. So if we end up over-identifying a student or two, I would almost rather err on that as opposed to under, and then having a whole other layer of decisions we have to make when it comes to identifying those close contacts.
No, and I understand that. And I think, I just want to say that it's just incredibly frustrating, okay, to try and make sense of this. Because as I said, I'm sorry, but you got kids on buses for up to 40 minutes sometimes. I mean, especially if you're coming through the center of town, you could be sitting in a lot of traffic. It doesn't seem to make sense that, we would be doing an in-the-school building, criteria separate from the bus criteria. And I do think it's something that we're going to have to watch as the school year starts. And we may have to change it. I think we have to be flexible. If it's not working or we see an area of concern, I think we have to make adjustments.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, but I think every school district is gonna have to do that too, because there is even like state context, but like our local context can be totally different than a community 50 miles away, but still in Massachusetts. I think we are gonna have to get into September and kind of see what's happening in Chelmsford, what's happening in our schools, and even, like you said, on buses or extracurriculars or sports, athletics, things along those lines. We are gonna have to watch the data. We're gonna be managing the cases like we did last year to kind of see where they're coming from. If we do, we're going to have a case. If when we get that case, are we seeing any kind of spread? Or is it an isolated case? And because of the things, the mitigation factors we have in place, is it not spreading? That's what we're going to hope, happens. And then if we ever found that wasn't happening, yes, we'd have to come back and revisit things.
Thank you.
I guess sort of in the seating chart type of thing too, especially the elementary school, are they going to go back to stations where the kids get in a smaller group? I know we want to try to get back to as normal as we can. Is the plan
Yeah.
still going to?
So what's going to happen because again, we do have to kind of return to more traditional, normal school. So at the elementary level, students are going to be closer together than they were last year. Just our spacing requirements alone don't allow us to have desks be spaced, 3 to 6 feet in all situations in the classroom. We want students to be able to get back to, say, having a morning meeting, sitting together on a rug, reading a story, things along those lines, doing small group work. It is going to be very difficult in the elementary setting, classroom in particular, just because the students are together for the whole day. It's not like middle school or high school where you're only spending a class and then you're going to meet another group of kids. But these kids are in a classroom all day. They're going to be traveling together. We're going to talk later about like specials and lunch. They're all going to be together as a group. It's highly likely if a student in a classroom is COVID positive, that again, when we're working with a teacher to identify who may have been within that student for more than 15 minutes, that a majority or even potentially all of the class would be identified as a close contact, again, just to be safe. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, working with Peggy and the nurses and the teacher. But then that class would have to follow the protocol, and we're going to get into that in a little bit about what their options are if that's the case. Obviously, as the kids get a little bit bigger, when you get to middle school to high school, they're able to even just on their own kind of distance a little bit more than, say, an elementary school student is. But no, the look and the feel of the classrooms is going to be more traditional. And I do think we need to return to that. The masks, I certainly think, are going to help. We're going to have to, obviously watch spread. And we may have a lot of students identified as close contacts, particularly at the elementary school level, just because of the proximity of the kids, them not being able to kind of manage themselves to be as distant as, say, the middle and the high school students, in the fact that they're together in the same class all day compared to, say, going out into different classes or being with different groups of kids. So in some respect, it's nice that they're a group and they're all together and we know who we're dealing with. Where, say, middle school, high school, you might have that student affecting 5 different groups of kids. Now we're going to have, say, at the elementary school level, primarily the kids are all focused within the same classroom, and they would be their own cohort, ultimately being their own close contacts.
Can I ask
Yeah,
another
sure.
question? Are we keeping the hallway flows and all of these things the way that we had it last year is one question. And my second question, I don't know if you're going to address it separately under school nutrition and so on, is about lunches.
Yeah, lunches, the whole lunchroom is
Okay.
later.
Yep,
in
so the question
agenda.
about the hallway and so on, what are we doing?
Yeah, no, we're not going to have designated one-way hallways necessarily within schools. I think even as we started to have everyone come back last year, we realized with even 80% of the kids in schools, it just, like at the high school, it just wasn't doable. I think the students did do a very good job, and at the elementary school level and even the middle school level to some effect, oftentimes staff leads the students down the hallway, so I'm not too concerned on that front. But even the middle school, the upper middle school and the high school kids did a pretty good job of kind of monitoring themselves, staying on one side of the hallway to pass the other side of the hallway, not lingering around a lot, but basically getting to class, getting to the bathroom. But no, we're not going to have any of those kind of designated restrictions that we had last year in place for this year.
Okay.
All right, so we kind of covered the definition of what a close contact is. So now we're going to transition to a little bit about what actually happens if we have a staff member or student who tests positive, what happens in that situation, and then if we have the close contacts and what their scenarios are. So Peg, do you maybe want to talk us through the first one?
Sure. So the first one will probably sound familiar because this is what we've seen for the past year and a half, that for an individual who tests positive for COVID-19, they will need to isolate at home for a minimum of 10 days after the symptoms started, or if they were asymptomatic or didn't have symptoms, they'll have to isolate from 48 hours from when the test was positive. So that is the same scenario as last year. And they can return after 10 days, so that would be on day 11. Once, if you had a fever, you have to be fever-free for 24 hours without fever-reducing medications such as Tylenol, ibuprofen, Advil, and that you've seen an improvement in any of the symptoms that you were having, and that you've received clearance from the Board of Health or the CTC, which is a community tracing collaborative. Sometimes the cases are sent to the CTC versus the Board of Health. And then we ask that the parents check in with the nurse just to verify that you, in fact, are cleared and that you're well enough to come back to school. So that will be the same as what we saw last year. So that remains the same.
Everyone good?
Okay, well, the 10 days brings up a lot of questions about folks who need to quarantine and what is the impact for them in terms of the students. For the students, how do they make up that work? What can they do? How's it going to be counted? That type of thing. And then the second part of it is, if it's a staff member, especially if it's a classroom teacher, how does it impact them in terms of time off, sick days, those type of things? And is there any provisions under the current law to help people with that? Because I know we're not supposed to do remote schooling. So then what are we gonna do?
Yeah, so there is no remote schooling, all right? So we're going back pre-COVID. So if someone does actually diagnose with COVID, they have to follow this protocol, they have to stay out of school. It would be like someone like having the chickenpox or something like that years ago, where you're home for those 10 days. Kind of more old school, students will have to receive work from their teacher to do on their own, projects, assignments. I do think a lot of our teachers who worked last year to kind of set up Google Classrooms and things like that, it was worked well. I think they'll continue that. We'll encourage them to continue that, because students might be able to pick up work and assignments and notes from the class right from that. But it'll be more traditional as far as, students won't be in school. They'll have to receive homework and assignments and make up that homework and assignments and submit it to the teacher for credit the way that they used to. That's how it'll work for them. If it is a staff member who tests positive, that staff member is also going to be out for 10 days. They're out for 10 sick days. It's not we'll have a long-term sub or a sub in the spot, but the teacher will not be remoting into the classroom to teach effectively. Going back to pre-COVID times, if you're sick and you're out, and you need to make up work and submit assignments and things like that.
Donna, question?
So the Department of Education came out last Friday in their FAQ. They talked about remote learning as a possibility. Can you just clarify what that was about?
I wish I could.
Okay.
I have to say, when I saw that on Saturday, nearly fell off my chair. So this had not been talked about anywhere, in any of the guidance or any of the meetings we'd had with the state to date. It caught off even my superintendent colleagues. No one saw where this was coming from. Doing a little bit of legwork today, and we're going to obviously push DESE for this. This is not kind of the permission to go back to remote schooling or anything like that. It seems to have stemmed maybe from a conversation among some of the special education folks at DESE with regard to trying to continue some of the services for special education students in a remote setting when they're out of school for, say, 10 days or something like that. Not even regular instruction, but if a student happened to be receiving, I don't know, some kind of physical, well, I guess we wouldn't do physical therapy, speech therapy, things like that, trying to continue those during that period. But it was not intended to be widespread. So we have asked DESE to please issue clarification for that, because the directive from the commissioner is that there is no remote learning. So we don't know where that came from, quite honestly.
Okay. So we're waiting.
Only
for
adds to the
clarification.
confusion, but.
Right, I know. So,
Yeah, but no, we were shocked as other readers were as well. Okay, so we have the positive people, and we're hoping we don't have many. We're now moving into, if you happen to be in the classroom with a positive case, and you're asymptomatic, but you're identified as a close contact, okay? What are your options? And we actually have more options than we had last year, which I think is good. And one of these options, I think, is a direct result of DESE saying, no, you can't, remote into classrooms. So we have a new option this year called test and stay. A second option would be, the quarantine and test to be able to come back a little bit earlier than the 10 days. And then the third option is if a family just does not want to test, then they just have to stay out the full duration of the quarantine. So, Peg, do you want to walk us through these options. And the first one we're going to cover, again, is test and stay. And this is the option that I would be recommending that families consider and take us up on if they happen to be identified as a close contact. They're asymptomatic, so the student feels fine. This is what I would recommend as their best option to be able to maintain some continuity with their schooling. Good.
So the test and stay is for a school exposure. So if you were exposed in school and identified as a close contact, the test and stay, the duration is 7 days. So what this means is the close contacts can remain in school and do not have to quarantine during the school day as long as they are symptom-free, so they're asymptomatic, they're not experiencing any symptoms. They wear a mask at all times, which they're required to do so anyway. When they're eating and drinking, we're going to, try to maintain, a minimum of 3 feet distance from other individuals to the extent that it's possible in the cafeteria, because we know you've been identified in the classroom as a close contact. So we're going to try to give you some separation at lunch. And you'll be required to have at school, when you come in the morning each day, the rapid antigen Binax Now test. And you'll do that every day, and as long as you receive a negative result each day, then you can remain in school. The 7 days probably may well include a weekend or a holiday. So the protocol asks that if you've been identified as a close contact and you've chose the test and stay protocol, that you would quarantine on the weekends, that you wouldn't be, outside, going to baseball, or, that you're quarantining at home on the weekends. And then come to school when school's back in session, and then we'll test you when you come back, and if you're negative, you remain in school. This protocol does allow that if you're negative during the 5 Monday through Friday, that you could do your after-school activities because you've tested negative that day. And we're going to also ask that they do active monitoring for symptoms. And what the active monitoring is, what we had asked last year to do, is that really you're thoughtful about checking your temperature every day, making sure you don't have a fever, making sure you're not experiencing any, loss of taste or smell, or, experiencing any of the COVID symptoms that we talked about. And that if you do experience a symptom, then we would ask you to get a PCR test if you were close contact and you weren't feeling well. So this test and stay is really looking to have the kids in school, if they're testing negative every day and they're feeling well, they can be in school. And the next slide talks a little bit about the rationale of where this test and stay came from. So, we are encouraging students and staff to utilize this test and stay model as an option so that you're minimizing the amount of time that you are, would be out of school. And the testing and quarantine response protocol has been shown to be, equivalent to quarantining for school-based contacts. It's been a safe alternative. And as I mentioned before, that if you do the test and stay protocol, you can participate in school sports or extracurricular activities as long as you've tested that day and you've been negative. And as part of the test and stay, they are asking that you would, recommend the individuals when you have outside of school activities that you would quarantine. And it's important to understand, this is for a school exposure only. This isn't for somebody that perhaps was exposed at, a cousin's birthday party or somewhere out in the community. And the reason they make that kind of delineation is that they're recognizing that a school exposure isn't equivalent to an outside of school exposure, because in school we have all the mitigation strategies. You're wearing your mask, you're really not sitting, very, very close to each other. You're washing your hands. We have the hand sanitizer. We have the frequent cleaning of the doorknobs and all the common areas, so that they're really kind of separating out a school exposure versus an outside of school exposure. So this is for if you identified as a close contact in school.
Now, when it says For events and sports to take place on non-school days, testing will be required. So let's say there's a field hockey game on a Saturday.
So we're talking about that right
Okay.
now. So Jay and I and Linda actually met today, and we're working on that to see what can we offer. Could we contract with someone to do the testing? CIC is the entity that's sort of helping us with this model. So I'm meeting with them tomorrow to find out, okay, could you offer us so that if you have, a band concert or a play or a soccer game, if you've been negative and you have no symptoms, can we help you and test you on the weekends? So we're looking very thoughtfully into how we can make that happen.
One thing I'd like, eating and drinking should maintain 3 feet of distance. So somebody is identified as a close contact. They're a sophomore. They're a 7th grader, 8th grader, one of those, okay? And they decide to follow this test and stay. So they come into school every day, they get tested, it's negative, they can stay. They keep their mask on, and the only place where everybody will know that they're a close contact and testing and staying is if they're not 3 feet, because they're maintaining a greater distance, or are we keeping everybody 3 feet apart when they're eating and drinking?
Let's deal with that when we get to the food stuff.
Okay,
to
but
the-
it
the
impacts
cafeteria.
this.
It does impact this, but I think what's going to end up happening is these students who are identified as close contacts, we are going to make a conscious effort to make sure that when they are unmasked in the cafeteria, that they're sitting further apart. So yes, they may be in a designated area to be able to eat. That is possible, because we want to make sure that this particular group, like, let's say this is the elementary level, and this is a class that was identified as the close contact. For the most part, we're having the classes, and we'll get into this later again, they'll be sitting together to eat in the caf. We will just make sure that these kids are spread out more when they're in the caf eating. But it is going to be known who that class is that's the close contacts. Is that?
Well, I'm just thinking, I mean, I have 2 17-year-olds, so I'm thinking about this. And, okay, I'm going to school today, and I'm going to get tested and everything. But, everybody, it's like I've got something, I'm quite different here from the other people at this point.
To be honest with you, I think, and again, I have like kids that age too. I actually think it's less concerning for me the higher you go, because the high school age students, number one, they're going to have more options for their, say, lunch, where they're going to eat. And again, we're going to get into
Oh,
that.
okay, good.
But also, they know more about, the high school kids don't have to necessarily have like assigned seating. They don't go sit by a class. It's not like they all go to the cafeteria together. So they can be more self-aware and actually position themselves or socially distance themselves better than, say, the elementary school kids can.
Okay, let's see what we're gonna do about lunch before I,
Okay.
okay.
All right, moving on. So that's one option. There are 3 options. Test and stay, we just covered. That would be the recommended option. If people do not feel comfortable and they want to keep their kids home to monitor them for symptoms, they can do what we did last year with quarantine and tests. So Peggy, will you cover this one?
Yes, so if we hit so the traditional protocol would be that what the families were told last year is that if you elect not to participate in the test and stay, then you would say, okay, I'm going to quarantine at home for my 7 days for my exposure. And what they can do is, it'll be recommended, as long as they're symptom-free, they can test with a PCR, which is preferred, or a rapid antigen. They can use either test on day 5. It's anywhere on day 5 or later, and that test is negative, the result is negative. They can return on day 8, and they will continue to actively monitor for symptoms through day 14. And then again, if they would develop symptoms, then they would, have another test, talk to their doctor, and see where that went. So essentially, this is what we're all used to from last year. And then the third option that we talked about was just the quarantine. So it could be that some families will choose not to participate in the test and stay. They may choose not to participate in the traditional protocol because they simply don't want to test. So this is the alternative protocol that they were, what they did last year. If they chose not to receive a COVID test, they would need to quarantine at least 10 days from the date of their exposure, and they could return on day 11 as long as they felt well, they hadn't had any symptoms, they come back on day 11, and then they simply do their active monitoring for the full 14 days. Not too many people chose the 10-day. Most people did choose the traditional protocol where they wanted to be back in school, and they most often chose to test on day 5 and come back. So those are the 3 options.
Questions on the other 2 options?
Great.
All right, so now we're going to shift into, we've kind of covered all the basics and notification of our positive cases and also our close contacts. So what we're going to do to start the school year is in the event of a positive COVID case in a staff member or student, all students and staff will be notified if there was an individual in their classroom who tests positive for COVID-19. Email communication will go out. Someone in the class has tested positive for COVID. Instead of doing 2 separate communications, in that same communication this year, it's going to either indicate your son or daughter has not been identified as a close contact. Therefore, they don't need to quarantine, they don't need to follow the protocol, or your son or daughter has been identified as a close contact, and here are your 3 options: test and stay, quarantine and test, or just do the full quarantine. So it's all going to be laid out in one communication this year. What we found, I think the communications were good last year, but we did have some situations where people would get the initial email notification, and then they wouldn't get the second one, but they wouldn't know if they just missed it, or, so we ended up getting the phone calls and questions anyway. So we're just going to put one communication out this year. There's an individual in the classroom who's identified, who's tested positive. You're either identified as a close contact or you're not. And then everyone, can make that decision, because even if you weren't identified as a close contact and you still want to be precautious and not have your child come to school, that can be on you. That can be the decision that you make. If you want them to do test and stay, let's say they were a close contact, then you'll have that available to you. Or you can do the quarantine and test, or you can just do the straight quarantine. But it's all going to be laid out in one communication. DESE this year is not going to be collecting that data. So if you recall last year, we had to weekly submit data to DESE about how many staff and student cases we had. That was posted on a DESE dashboard. We kind of created our own dashboard that matched that. There is going to be no state dashboard for that this year. So what we're going to do is we're still going to control or can create our own dashboard, just so that families and staff in the district can actually monitor school by school. If there was a case among a staff or a student, we're going to put that up on our website on a weekly basis, so that people can see that, yes, there was actually a case, or there's 2, or there's 1, or whatnot. But people are not going to be able to look to the DESE site or the state site either to kind of make those matches. But we're going to put out, I'll work with Peggy on that, add a little section to the website, and we'll refresh and activate that. So I think that will cover our bases, so that people will see if there was a case in a school, whether it affected them or not. If they were in the classroom where it was affected, they're going to get a communication, and that communication is going to say you're a close contact or you're not. So that's how we're planning to start the school year, and again, tracking that data and keeping that going.
So is there a way, so we had, I had some parents contact me last year. They had 3 sons at the high school. And it says your son was a close contact, but they didn't know which one. Is there a way that we can indicate that this year?
Yeah, I think the issue with that was, I was hearing that complaint too I think it was the phone calls? There was some communication that was going out that was just like a broad communication.
Right.
And it didn't hone down to which student was involved. I think as the year went on, after we heard that, I believe we have that remedied. But yes, this year, I think it would be easy enough in that one communication if you have two sons, Jay and Linda, someone in Jay's class has tested positive, Linda's fine. But yes, we can work on that communication-wise. But we want to kind of clear it up and just get one communication that's all encompassing.
Absolutely. I just
And
want to make
gives
sure
them
it's
what
about
they
the
want.
right kid.
You're right.
And how we keeping track of vaccination status so that if there is a close contact, we give the right recommendation of you don't have to quarantine, how we,
Yeah, so we're working on that right now, and we're hoping to send out information and have like a Google form where we'll invite you to share your status, and if you would like to share your vaccination status, you could upload your card, and that could go to the nurses, and it's, a confidential email, so that if you're vaccinated, you're willing to share, then we'll know. And we'll probably put something that might say, I decline to share my status. And what we'll say in our communication is that if we're not sure of what your vaccination status, then we'll need to assume that you'll be identified as a close contact because we don't know.
Yeah, we're going to start to collect that data because we're going to need that data at some point in the fall or the winter as things roll out. So we will ask people to just send staff and students, just send us a copy of your card. It'll be part of your medical record, but that will help us also so that we're not over-identifying close contacts if we don't need to. And that'll also help some of our staff and students make decisions about which particular option they may like. So that will also be going out very soon as well.
Okay. All right. Mike, I think I didn't connect the exceptions. So in asking my questions, I think a large group of people are actually not going to be close contacts because
Right.
you've got asymptomatic, fully vaccinated.
Particularly at the high school level.
Yeah, and that's the thing that, hopefully, the reason I'm asking those questions is I feel extremely bad for making people stand out in this type of setting. It's hard. It's hard for kids. It's hard for young people to remain fully upfront, fully honest about things and how they're feeling and so on. And I don't want anybody to not say how they're feeling and be honest about things because they're going to be missing a certain amount of school or because they're going to be become that person that everybody looks at. So that's why my line of question. But there is a very large group, especially at that level, and 7 beyond, who are not part of close contacts, are exempt.
I agree. No one wants, to single anyone out on this, and we want to be as cautious as we can. And maybe I wasn't processing the fact that you were asking the question under that context. But if you think about our current, say, 7th to 12th graders, or even if you want to just focus on the high school, looking at the data, just, again, we don't have individual data for our Chelmsford kids, Chelmsford high school kids. But if you look at like Chelmsford as a whole, I want to say we're in the mid to high 70s as far as a vaccination rate for the 15 to 19-year-old category. So that's like 7 out of 10 kids at the high school are already vaccinated. And if they're able to produce their card to document that for us, then that's 70% of the students who potentially would be identified as a close contact aren't going to be. So they're not going to be excluded from school. They're not going to have to quarantine. They still need to be cautious when they're, eating and things like that. But there is going to be a different way for them to still engage in school. So I do think it's a little different when you get to the upper grade levels.
Yeah, I'm seeing that in the whole scheme of things, and I just wanted to state that I'm seeing it.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
More than likely that the K through 6 students who at this time are unable to be vaccinated would probably be more looking at those students, by and large, would be close contacts, whereas a group of kids versus grades 7 to 12, a large majority are vaccinated, so we should have those kids in school.
Yeah, because Peggy, you know how much I love the word close contact.
I know,
Oh, she had to contact me several times.
I know. You
Okay,
really
thank you.
did.
And again, I actually feel really bad for some of our families because it seemed like it was the same families over and over, as you know, over and over again, that were getting you're a close contact.
I
So
know.
It's tough, but I do think it's going to be different this year, particularly at the high school level,
Yeah.
because of the vaccination rate is so high.
Okay, thank you.
Just to Maria's point, I'm sorry. I do think our staff is really good about, monitoring, things. And I think that, like we would do in any situation around bullying or anything like that. People are going to have to step in and say, it's not okay. And feel comfortable doing that if students are targeted or singled out for, these reasons. Jeff has said it many times, it's going to take the
That's correct.
participation of the entire community. And so, kids doing the right thing should actually be applauded, not, vilified or singled out in any way.
Right, any other questions on testing or close contacts or quarantining or any of that section? Okay, all right, well, thank you, Peggy.
All right, so transitioning a little bit into just some of the extra, kind of the mitigation, more generic type stuff. Cleaning of facilities. So again, I touched on this a little bit earlier in the day, early in the presentation this evening, but this was very well welcomed last year. But we are going to be adding some additional contracted cleaning services and then our own custodians doing some extra. We've allocated some money in overtime to do some extra deep cleaning on the Wednesdays and Saturdays. So that is going to be in effect. Again, our own custodians, we call it fogging, but you know how they kind of spray the area down. So we'll be doing that. The common areas every day and all the offices and classroom spaces at least twice weekly. That really helped keep everything down last year. I mean, not even COVID, but we really didn't see a lot of sickness in the district because of all the different precautions. And then nicely for us, this actually is not impacting our local budget. The ESSER funds, we're able to pay for the costs of the additional contracted cleaners and also our own custodians. So that's welcome news. And I wanted to just touch on the extensive amount of work that took place last fall, because people often talk about our HVAC systems, and at this point, they really are all in, they've been gone through, they're in good working order. We have the highest level of the filtering that we can possibly have in there. The work started last fall, went all the way to the spring. There's even punch work that took place over the course of the summer, but we're in very good shape on that front. We will eventually find a kind of a section of the website to upload all the different reports, because from time to time, someone would like to read one of these reports. So we'll get them up on the website. But the contractor actually went through all the Chelmsford Public School facilities, all the unit HVACs in the classrooms, rooftop units, balanced all the different systems, came in with recommendations about level of filtering, like I said. And then at this point, really, there were just a handful of punch list items that they were just repairing over the course of the summer. But HVAC-wise, we're in very good shape to start the year. The town, with some of their not COVID money, the kind of their version of ESSER money, actually paid for this for us. We're running up to close to about $1 million at this point in different upgrades and things that were made. And the town is also going to be having their contractors be on board more days and more hours this winter again to just be able to respond to things as they come up. So we're very happy with the status of the HVAC repairs. A question comes up from time to time about personal protective equipment or PPE, which we have so much I do not know what to do with it all. So we ordered a ton last year. There was really no shortage in our schools for, hand sanitizer, face masks for students or staff. Obviously, most people wore their own face masks to school last year. We encourage that, just to kind of have your own that you can use. But we always have them available in the school if need be. In the offices and the classrooms all have hand sanitizer. And for our nursing staff, they have some specialized gear. They have face shields and gloves and gowns and goggles and special masks that they wear. So again, no shortage of PPE. We encourage people to bring their own mask, wear their own mask to school. But if the event of, a malfunction, something breaks, we have more than enough stock in the schools to help us on that front.
And we didn't have a lot of plexiglass barriers, right? Because they're finding they're actually worse than not having them.
Oh, I hadn't
Yeah.
seen that. The only plexiglass barriers we had for the most part were sometimes like in the, if people were doing like small group, say like a reading intervention or like a speech class, I saw some of that. We didn't have a ton of it.
Okay.
And I'm thinking at this point too, a lot of our staff are obviously vaccinated. We had a very high vaccination rate of staff. I'm not thinking that that's going to be as big of a concern this year.
Yeah.
But we didn't have too much of it to
Okay,
begin
good.
with.
Donna?
Do we still have air purifiers in the classroom?
We have air purifiers in any of the rooms that don't have clean air exchange. So if there were like any offices that didn't, or classrooms that didn't have the clean air exchange, they have air purifiers. So it's like, almost like a parallel running system. They get their own filters changed regularly. And yeah, they're in place.
That's what I wanted about the filters. Thank you.
Yeah, they're on like an annual renewal, so we're in good shape on that. All right, switching into school nutrition. So again, this has been discussed a little bit, but USDA is going to again pay for all of our breakfast and lunch program. So I think this will be welcome news for families, but families are not going to have to pay either full or partial payment for breakfast and lunch this year. It is going to be open to any student, K-12, can have a breakfast in the morning and can have a lunch in the afternoon. At the secondary level, they are going to go back to kind of having à la carte type items where you can buy extra things. Students do need to pay with their own money for the à la carte items. But your first breakfast and your first lunch each day will be paid for, so that'll certainly be helpful. And then as we talk, and Maria had mentioned earlier, and I know we've actually gotten some emails on, return to lunch, and what is lunch going to look like? That's the one part of the day that seems to be making people a little extra antsy, and I totally get it, because you have to be unmasked to eat. There's no way around that. And we do need to return to having our lunch in the cafeterias. If you think about last year, just scheduling-wise and space-wise, we were using the cafeteria, we were using adjoining gyms. We had some of the classroom eating in their own classroom to just kind of break up the numbers so that we had distancing. And that wasn't even at 100% of students back in the buildings. So with 100% of students back in the buildings and the need to be able to use the gym for physical education class and classrooms and whatnot, we do need to return to a more common, regular eating in the cafeterias. So this will be at the elementary, the middle, and the high school level. At the elementary level, and again, this is the group that really can't be vaccinated, so if you have a situation where, you have a close contact, it likely is going to be a significant amount or even potentially all of the class. We are going to be sitting the classes together in the CAF. Spacing them out as best we can, given the tables we have and whatnot, but we are going to be under some space constraints within the schools because we do have to feed all of the kids there. But at least if I'm in classroom 101, and I'm with that cohort of students all day, I'm also going to be eating lunch with Classroom 101 because they're my friends and we're going to have lunch together. So for contract tracing purposes, we're going to know exactly who that group is. We're working with the schools, and I've talked to a few of the principals around how they're going to kind of keep track of, where the kids are sitting in the CAF and whatnot. They were able to come up with different plans last year. We'll continue to refine those because, again, I do realize this is kind of a hot topic for people. But what we are going to have students do is they're going to enter the cafeteria with their mask on, pick up their lunch, go sit at the table. They're going to take the mask off. They're going to eat their lunch. They'll put the mask back on, and they'll either go out to recess or they'll go back to the classroom, depending on which, because it's kind of split half and half, which is taking place. Again, we will keep the elementary and even going into the middle school, kids primarily in assigned seats by tables with their cohorts of students so that we can identify who's sitting where. At the middle school level and then at the high school level, we have a little bit more freedom and flexibility because of the age and the size of the student and a different kind of supervision. But the middle schools and the high school are making outdoor areas available for students to be able to pick up their lunch and go outside and eat if they would like to. There are different options they're weighing in the cafeterias, even having some extra seating to make it available for people if they want a little bit more distancing, if they're not necessarily comfortable with sitting at the table with their class or whatnot. So that is still a little bit of a work in progress, but we do need to get back to all eating in the cafeteria together. Again, we're going to distance as much as we physically can. There were a lot of constraints on again, space, and it's not perfect as far as we can't take over multiple other building areas to run lunch like we did. And we also have to go back to running a more traditional school schedule, because if you think about it, last year, we had, like specialists were locked in the schedule at certain points of the day, so that we had the ability to have, say, many more lunch periods or for different times, and we're constrained on that this year. So we do have additional physical constraints, and we also have size constraints. But we are going to continue to work that through with staff and make it as absolutely safe as we possibly can, keeping track of who's eating where. And again, I do feel a little differently about the upper middle school and the high school, because again, you're going to have the vaccination rates, and you're also going to have the ability to go outside and to distance themselves a little bit better. But I know we have had a couple of questions about lunch in the CAF, so that is how we plan to implement that for the start of the school year.
So, can I ask about this? So in terms of the elementary level and the middle school, where, the vaccination is not available, and we've got, is more, I guess I'm not getting it fully. You're saying returning fully to the cafeteria to eat, period. We're not giving additional space, like the gym or going out or outside every day or whatever? We're not doing that. It's cafeteria.
No, we'll try to use outside as much as we can. It becomes more difficult with the younger students, with just supervision is different than is required for middle school and high school. But say, last year, we had a more locked schedule, so this year, we're gonna have classes every period rotating into, say, the gym to have phys ed class.
Right.
We don't have a 2 or 3 hour block in the day where the gym is not being occupied, because last year we had desks set up in the CAF, we had desks set up in the gym. We need the gym for the class space, for the phys ed kids to be rotating through. So we just have those kind of constraints that we're dealing with this year. So we are gonna have to use the cafeteria as the primary eating area as we come back. But we're trying to space it as much as we possibly can. We're trying to keep kids together by class as much as we possibly can, again, to keep the cohorts together. And when we have opportunities, and I see just much more room for this at the middle school and the high school, having, say, outdoor opportunities, weather permitting, so that students could go outside and eat and, have outside air so that they're not dealing with the inside. Again, we're going to start. We're going to see how things go. We're always open for modifications to see how we can make this better. But we are going to be going back to a more traditional lunch period.
Are we renting tents again, or are they outside, or?
No, that wasn't as popular, to be honest with you, as it was last fall. I think the issue is it becomes cold and windy in October. When we did the tents last spring, and I think a lot of school districts did, they really actually got 3 or 4 months of use from them. There were we didn't, and there are a lot of districts that really aren't, because by the time you hit Columbus Day weekend, the tent companies themselves too, when you're dealing with like wind and liability, it just becomes difficult. So for 2 or 3 weeks, to then have to like redo a schedule, we decided not to do the tents. But, it's still during the day, as long as it's not raining. If we can make spaces outside for even a class to go outside and, eat together. We're certainly going to try to do that. I am working with the principals on that. They have some good ideas. It's just going to take a little bit of time to kind of get them all into effect.
Donna? You got something?
So I do want to separate out the upper middle and high school kids. And I'm wondering too, that if we would consider using the PAC or some of the lecture halls in the middle schools as alternative spaces for kids to be able to eat if they wanted to space out. And also to consider, I know that we hired extra staff last year. If we need to do that this year so that we can spread kids out, then I think that we should take a look at doing that. Because of the supervision issue, right? I mean, but I think that is something that we should put back on the table, as I said, to offer ourselves the flexibility of being able to spread the kids out. The elementary kids remain my biggest concern because of the lack of vaccination. And I was trying to figure out if we looked at all of our options in terms of, lunch scheduling. So can we do smaller lunches and more lunches, for example? Could we flip recess and lunch? So half goes out, for recess, and the other half stays in the cafeteria, and then we flip. Are we looking at other areas? Is eating in the classrooms an option, and why isn't it? And then ironically, the CDC recommends 20 minutes for kids to eat their lunch, and that doesn't count being in line or cleaning up. It's 20 minutes actually eating. So I'm somewhat reluctant to recommend it, even reducing the amount of time that we allow them to eat, and then get them out of the cafeteria as quickly as we can and get, outside or back to their classrooms.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we have spent a lot of time on this, and I mean, this has been discussion all through the summer, and like even the principal planning groups and our superintendent groups, all the districts are kind of wrestling with this. We're looking for best practices and best options, and this is the first year that we're all going to be doing this. I think I want to go back to the last year. We were very successful in what we did. We learned along the way. If something was working well, we maintained it, we improved it. If something wasn't, we weren't afraid to change. So I think we're approaching this in the same way. We're flexible. We're going to see what works. We'll make modifications as we have to. Some of the things that you bring up as far as, say, like the half and half, I mean, the half and half a recess, we primarily do that now. So oftentimes, let's say, second grade might be in the cafeteria eating lunch. Well, third grade is outside having recess. And it's about a 50-minute ballpark period where about half is inside, 25 minutes or so eating, and then another half might be outside playing. Can they fool around with how much time is inside? Yes, maybe by a few minutes here or there. But honestly, with the little guys, it takes you time to get from the classroom to the caf, to get in line, to get your lunch, to sit down. Sometimes it actually does take you 20, 25 minutes to even just get all the way through the system and have a few minutes to eat, and then get ready to go outside. But they do have the schedule pretty tight so that, when second grade's eating, third grade, like I said, is playing, and then they'll rotate. Third grade comes in and eats, and then second grade goes out and has the recess. So it's not that there's no one, kind of having that recess at that time. I forgot some of your other points.
Eating in the classroom, smaller lunches and more frequent lunches.
Small lunches, more frequent lunches really just impacts the schedule, right? So the problem is when you start to do that, you're impacting how long, say, like your special classes are, because you only have so many specialists to run, say, art, music, and phys ed at a particular time. And they can't be in two places at the same time. So it really just becomes a scheduling issue. The lunch in the classrooms becomes a kind of a supervision issue. If you had, half the students eating in the class and half in the cafeteria, it's going to require twice as many adults. Monetarily, I'm not concerned. I mean, we have more than enough money. That's not the problem. It's more finding the consistent, bodies to be able to actually staff and man that on a day-to-day basis. And again, if you even did that, it would impact the schedule. And I think that is just, it's difficult because even then when you get down to like the real classroom level, if you're now extending, say, from 3 lunches to 6 lunches, well, that reading specialist might have been available for a particular time to see a group of kids. But now if you have half the kids in their group having lunch and another half isn't, it can just upset the service delivery that the students actually receive. I truly believe the best way to go about this is to let us get the year started like we did last year. The schools are working on their spacing, they're working on the distancing, they're working on keeping track of where students are having their lunch and identifying, who potentially would be a close contact as a result of this. Let us have a couple of weeks to implement and make changes at the ground level in the schools, see how things are going, make those changes as need be. And then if I need to come back to you and say, hey, something isn't working, I'm not afraid to do that. I need extra help, we're going to need this, that, or the other thing, I'll work with you on that. I think also once we actually get into the flow of like the school year again, and we saw this a little bit last year, I know that there's a lot of apprehension about the start of the school year. Everyone gets a little nervous at this point. After the first week or two of school last year and people saw the routines we put in place and the practices we had, I think people felt much safer and better about their kids going off to school. And I really do think that'll happen a lot this year. I know the schools have been over the last couple of weeks doing a lot of work with like tours and things like that. And we have to remember, we had a lot of families who are very concerned, and rightfully so, who were fully remote last year. They had elected to be fully remote last year, so they didn't have the experience that we had kind of going through the setup and knowing our protocols and practices and whatnot. So this is their first experience, really, 16 months after, leaving from the pandemic. So I do think there's extra anxiety with some of those folks. And like I said, I truly get it because they haven't had that experience. They don't know what sending their students next week to school is going to be like. But we're going to take good care of them. We've put a lot of time and planning into all of these different processes within the school. We'll work to improve them and better them. And like I said, I'm not afraid to come to you and say, hey, something isn't working. We need to change something up. The principals are excellent in doing that, identifying problems, coming up with solutions, and implementing them. And we're going to be, having to adapt over the course of this fall as we figure out coming back what's really working well, what we need to change. But I think if people give us a little bit of time, like we did last year, I think they'll be very happy with the outcome.
So I think, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate your explanation about the alternatives, and I do think that we, obviously need to monitor things.
Yeah.
I'm anxious, okay, about the kids returning, especially at the elementary level. And because as I'm watching the numbers rise, and as I'm reading about things happening around the country, I know we want time, but I think, the decisions that we've had to make all along the way that have kept us up at night is what happens if somebody gets sick? What happens if, it's a catastrophic illness that leaves them with lifelong, issues or death? And even if it was one student, I think it would be really more than we could bear. And so, I want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to keep the kids safe. And I agree with you. I think last year we did a good job. But things are different this year because, we have this variant. And the numbers are going up. And I don't think anybody would have predicted that they were going to go up as quickly as they are, last spring. I actually had hoped that we were done with this. So, I would ask that we monitor this very, very carefully. And I think that we have to find ways to be creative and flexible. And if we have to hire the staff, let's just do it and spread kids out as much as we possibly can because, one kid is one kid too many, as far as I'm concerned. So.
I would add to that, it's not just elementary, it's also 5 and 6. That concerns me as well. It's a different group from the protections that they have are different from the grades 7, 8, and up at this time, okay? So I think we have to make extra efforts. I think Donna is perfect. I would echo what she said, that we have to try very, very hard to find as much of an alternative as we can for those that grade. And you were also correct in your statement that, the greatest concern and the greatest questions, the greater number of people who are questioning the whole lunch process are the folks who have been fully remote, because they have not been exposed to the system. Now, is there some way that principals could, if somebody is concerned and they need to go see the place, go see what it looks like, what it's going to be like, can they reach out to the principal and so that they can be more at ease when they go in, if they can be? I also think we're in a very different situation because folks don't have a choice. They did last year. They don't this year. And that's just what the state's imposing, and it's what we have to live with. We don't have a choice. So I think if they don't, and we can give them a bit more ease, I think it would be very good for us as a school system to do that. And again, any options we can offer, I think we should give it our best shot at this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think from the family perspective and the discussions I've had with the principals, they're actually seeing far greater participation in like the opening tours, the going back to school tours. And I think I was mentioning to Donna earlier, I think some of that is actually that, say our 6th grade students for next year. Well, if you had opted to be fully remote for 5th grade, you didn't really come into the building at all last year. So this is your first experience coming in. You really didn't even have a proper close to your 4th grade year to even kind of prepare for middle school. So this is kind of like in the waiting. So I do think some of those questions are coming from even like some of the tours that are taking place in the schools. I'm very happy that they're very well populated. I think each of the schools really put out a lot of dates this year where people could come in and get a tour of the school, talk about the program, answer some of these questions. And I do think a lot of concerns are being allayed at the school level, but I'll reinforce that with the schools to, again, I know they are, but just to be open to that and to really, I know a couple of them had brought it up to me, that some of the more concerned parents are coming from students who happen to have been remote last year. And I think we do have to remember that. And we have to take that into consideration when we're doing our planning, because we're going to have to obviously welcome them back, but this is their first time coming back from many of these schools. So, so we will do that. And we'll continue to push that.
I think one thing we can do in the cafeterias right off the bat is just make sure that the ventilation is as much as it possibly can be. Open up the outside doors, make sure the windows are open, and anything else that would be safely recommended that we can put into place. I have no idea what the use of fans is right now. It wasn't for a while, then it is, I don't know. But anyways, anything that we can do to make sure that there's good air circulation in there, I think that that would be a good place to start as well.
Yeah, and again, I agree with you, like, those have all also been looked at as part of the HVAC work and the balancing work. And like common areas like that have a much higher flow rate than like an individual classroom would. But yes, so that is something that's taken into consideration.
Thank you.
Anything else on lunches? Okay.
All right, so why don't we shift the other common question that we're receiving from parents and some students too, is like what we're gonna do with some of the specials this year. So like art and phys ed and things like that. So Christy Whittlesey, our fine and performing arts coordinator, put together just a little slide to talk about performing and visual arts. So this just does indicate that, masks are gonna be required in classes at all times during the school day, after school, and for performances to start the school year. They do encourage the students to sanitize regularly when coming into class. They leave as much room as they can between students layout-wise within the classes. For band specific, because we've got a couple of these questions, the different musicians will use masks and bell covers as they're working indoors. The general music classes will use masks when they play their recorders indoors. And then chorus will also mask when singing indoors. As much as they possibly can, particularly in the fall where the weather is good, they try to take these classes outside. So when they're outside, they can lift the masking and the distancing. They have much more room to spread around, so they do that. On the visual arts front, masking again indoors at all times in the classes during the school day and for clubs. They also, again, spread out the students and leave as much space between them as they possibly can, given the rooms that they're in. They are going to be able to share materials this year. Remember, that was something last year that we really tried not to do, but students can share materials this year. And what they're really working on is more making sure they're sanitized between use. So after classes, at the end of the school day, when students are going to be sharing materials, they'll just be sanitized. But I hope that slide kind of answers a couple of questions about, kind of our arts program and music program. And then Katie Sims, our coordinator for phys ed and health, put together a little slide for phys ed classes. And again, when all the students are indoors, they are going to have to mask. Again, through the fall, they're going to try to do as much of the phys ed classes outside as they possibly can because they don't have to worry about the masking. They distance within the gymnasiums as much as they possibly can, given the space. Because the kids are running around, they do take breaks, like little mask breaks during the phys ed class. They make sure that the kids are properly distanced. They also sanitize and push, kind of washing your hands or using hand sanitizer before and after class. And then the equipment that they use, if it's, common equipment or whatever, it's disinfected regularly at the end of class or the end of the day between uses. So I'm hoping that those couple of slides help us with art, music, and phys ed. And then when it comes to extracurricular activities and athletics, we are planning a regular full implementation of all of our programs for the fall. So all of our extracurricular clubs, at the middle school and the high school level, our intramural sports, our regular athletic program at the middle and high school level are all planning to occur as scheduled. If there are any kind of modifications per sport, and I honestly don't even know them all off the top of my head, but if there are any modifications to sport, we're going to follow the MIAA guidelines on those. Basically, when it comes to masking, again, masking is going to be required on all sports that occur indoors, and masks are not required for sports that occur outdoors. But if there are any changes, we'll follow the MIAA rules. And again, we're working with Peggy on, say, weekend coverage for both sports and, let's say it was a theater or a band or something like that, and someone participates in the test and stay program, and they are still under their 7-day test period, which happens to fall on a Saturday or Sunday, and there's a contest or an activity that's occurring that night, we're going to figure out a way for them to be able to come to a location at a certain time to take their test for the day, to clear them to be able to participate in their activity on that Saturday or Sunday. To be determined how it's going to happen. But one way or the other, we'll figure out how that's going to happen so that students will be able to continue their 7 days test if they want to and participate in the activity at the end of the day.
Is the MVC scheduling similar to last year, where they try to keep like two schools participating together for a week in all the different sports, or I know there was a lot of collaboration that went on
Last year we did.
Yeah, a lot of
There was a lot of concern last year around like the cross-contamination at
exactly.
schools and things. I haven't been as actively involved. We used to hold like a weekly meeting with the superintendents. The athletic directors have kind of taken on the charge with that. I can follow up with you because I haven't looked to see how closely the schedules are mirrored, like community to community. So you're playing like, say, all Billerica or Drake or Tewksbury in the same week, but I'll look for you.
Right, any other questions
That's
on
it.
any of the stuff, Jeff?
We were here a year ago, and we weren't sure when we made those decisions how we were going to get through the year. And I think the key was we were flexible. We looked at the situations, we had cooperation from everyone involved. And I know there's anxiety and there's concern, but I think if we stay as flexible as we did last year, if we look at things as they happen and we trust the people who are in the buildings, and, you know, the nurses, the teachers, the staff, the principals, administration, we did it last year. And I really believe that with that mindset and the lessons that we learned from last year, that this anxiety and what we're concerned about now, I believe we have everything in place that we can get through this year, the same way the beginning of this year. And I think concerns about lunches and everything else, I think is people being flexible, making sure what's going on at all time. Those of us, you do that with your classroom every day when you go in and things are different. I really believe, and I'm confident that we're going to be able to do this.
Thank you. That was very well said.
Thank
I want to thank you, Peggy and Sue Rosa, because I know that you guys went above and beyond last year, and the hours that you put in were extraordinary. We're relying on you as the COVID experts, we're not, to keep us, you know, in line with the things that we need to be doing. So any input, obviously, is greatly appreciated, and I know you talk to Jay on a regular basis, but I don't think that we've actually had the chance to thank you publicly for everything that you did for the district last year. And
Thank you for saying that.
I second that. No doubt.
Very kind. It was a great group to work with. I will say from the top down, from Jay and Linda, from Sue Rosa at the Board of Health, we probably had each other on speed dial. We talked to, you know, on a daily basis. The summer, we had like a little break in maybe first week of July. We're on vacation. However, we, you know, spoke all summer, and now that's, you know, ramped up since really mid-July. I spoke to her today. So we'll be, you know, continuing to work with the Board of Health, work with administration, with the teachers, the building administrators. I mean, I will say, I can't tell you enough how wonderful and how supportive. And, you know, we're going to look at what we're doing that's working well, and then we're going to look at what we're doing that, you know, we could do better. And we'll obviously keep in great contact with the Board of Health to see what are the community numbers and how are the community numbers going to, you know, impact the schools.
right, and I think you're going to be a key player in our flexibility because, you know, you're really kind of on the front lines. I mean, you're going to know more and faster than any of us how things are changing in the community and in the schools and what we need to do to make adjustments
Yep.
so we can keep people safe.
And we will, you know, and the main thing, the test and stay, you know, it's what we're recommended. I know that is a new protocol, and we're going to do our best to, you know, follow it with fidelity. If it turns out that we're finding that, gee, you know, we're having these test and stay, however, we're having X number of cases, it's turned out that, you know, they then subsequently test positive, we'll look at that protocol. So we're going to look at all our protocols and be sure that we're, you know, acting in the best interests of the kids and the staff and the entire building, as well as this impacts the community as well, because obviously the school community lives in the outside community. So we're all going to work together, you know, as best we can. And we certainly did it very well last year. So I don't anticipate that we, you know, we're going to have the same success. I really believe that as we did last year.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'd just like to tell Peggy that if anybody's going to tell me there's a close contact in my family, it should be you.
Oh, yes.
You really did do a tremendous job and are doing a tremendous job, and it's truly appreciated. And I know the cooperation has been immense.
It has.
From every level, and it's truly appreciated. And yes, Jeff's words also mean a lot. It's true, we need the cooperation of everybody, and that's how it works. And you have really, truly done a tremendous job, so thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you. I
For all the kids. And when you said it's for the kids, it is for the kids, and I appreciate that you said that. Because then I know exactly where what your goal is. Your goal is to achieve this for the
Our
children,
heart is with the
our
kids.
students.
We all want what's in the best interest of all our students and our staff. And, you know, we're a community and, you know, we want everybody to have the best chance at, you know, a successful education with a successful health and wellness combined.
Much appreciated, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
So is this already new items, or is this?
Just any more questions on the presentation that we just did?
Okay.
Okay, all right. So any liaison reports? We doubt anybody's yet. We're starting up soon, so if you want to contact your schools and.
And I would also encourage parents to make sure that they're checking the website and their school's calendars to see what upcoming events may be happening.
Yep.
And in terms of the website, I have received several very positive comments about the website, especially this week because people are looking at information. So just to let you know,
That's good to hear, thank you.
that it was very good.
Right. Any new items, action items? Yep. Right.
So in terms of the plans that we heard tonight and everything, I would also like to see a little bit more talked about in terms of how technology is going to enter into the curriculum and the implementation of what's going on this coming year. For example, some of the questions might be, all right, so I'm not a freshman, sophomore, I'm not a fifth, sixth grader that has assigned computers, but I have a computer. Am I going to be allowed to use that for notes versus using a notebook consistently throughout the year? Or it might be, you know, in a classroom, what's the percentage of time that students can have, are going to have lessons using technology? Is there any protocols that we have set up, and what's the plan for the continuation of use of technology in the classrooms? We have it. You know, if I was a teacher in a regular classroom right now, I'd want those pencils and pens and all the paper that you can provide. As you can tell, I'm a very paper-oriented individual. But we are in a different era, and I'm getting questions about from students and parents, what's going to happen in terms of technology. And it might not be the most pressing thing on day one, but it's going to become important in the coming couple of months. So it would be nice to know that if you can put that on the agenda at some point.
Anything else? The only other thing I had, and we've talked about it before, but just getting back to the strategic plan and finding a company to help us out with
Yeah, I
that.
think I'll have an update for you at the next meeting. We've actually been talking to and interviewing a couple of different firms to come in with us and actually help kind of shepherd that project. So I hope to have an update for you at the next meeting.
Great. Anybody else?
Just thank you for the work. This is a tremendous amount of work that went into tonight's meeting and into doing this and keeping up with all the last-minute changes and everything that's happened.
Yeah.
So that is truly appreciated as well.
It's been a collective effort. I mean, we've talked about, I mean, this day-to-day, things are changing, so we're trying to update. I appreciate the comments. Everyone is working hard, particularly at the school level and here at the district level, to support the school level work. I would say if any of the parents or any of the community members who are watching this meeting, you know, had any questions about the slide or whatnot, just as a reminder, our packet is up online on the website. So if you wanted to see the slide, if you missed something, or you wanted to go back and refer to it, you can go to the website and actually download the packet with that presentation in it, just to have all of the information.
It's under our tab.
Right,
It's under school committee.
It's under school committee and then meeting agendas and packets, but it is up on the website.
Yes,
And people can go and access that.
thank you.
All right, we're at second public input part of our meeting. Anybody receive anything new? I think we covered most of the questions that we had emails about, so
Just making sure.
Question.
certainly.
So it finally took, it's nice to see that Commissioner Riley has come out with the mask mandate. Do we anticipate any further guidelines coming from him over the next couple of weeks?
With regard to the mask mandate, I know this was a kind of a touchy subject, statewide. There are some, who I think supported a mask mandate, some who didn't. Some who, if there was going to be a mask mandate, would have been nice if it was a couple of weeks ago, planning-wise. I think from our conversations, I think when they made the decision not to have a mask mandate in, early to mid-July, I think they did not feel that the statewide numbers supported it at that time. But as we've been getting closer and closer to school, and I think obviously just politically, masking has become kind of a divisive topic within communities. They decided it would be best to actually start the school year with the mask in K-12. I think, and again, I haven't read it because it just came out today, but I want to read the guidance. I know that it states that, all staff and students, regardless of vaccination, when indoors, will mask through October 1st. And I think what that's going to allow is us to get into September to actually kind of look at that data or what's happening statewide in communities and make some decisions. Does that mask mandate need to be extended? Does, are the cases just not there? And it really then could be a community decision about what to do with masking. And I think that's where the metric that they're talking about where, potentially if a school reaches a certain threshold as far as vaccination is concerned. Again, I think the number they're tossing around is like 80% of staff and students. And then you kind of look at your community spread and your community numbers. And again, I don't remember exactly where they have to be, but if you're within that band where you're not seeing widespread spread within your community, then you can petition the state for like a waiver to have to wear the mask mandate. Now, I don't know at that point if that is just like for us. I mean, let's just say that actually happened. For all practical purposes, unless the vaccine were made available to those under 12, I don't see our elementary and our middle schools being able to qualify. Because if you have to get 80% of the staff, and you're already saying that, staff and students, you're already saying that 50% aren't even eligible for the vaccine, then you're not going to hit the 80% threshold with the rest. Mathematically, it just can't happen. So our only school that would really be in play is the high school, and so potentially you could look at if the high school hit all of these thresholds, do you then apply for the waiver and have the high school maybe not be required to be masked, but it would be, if you have the vaccine, you would not have to mask, and it would be highly recommended that anyone that didn't have the vaccine wear a mask. I don't know what those nuances are going to end up being, but I'll report for you as soon as maybe the next meeting or two, just so that we can keep it on the radar.
I just want to clarify one thing. So it appears that Desi was once again a little late out of the gate in terms of getting us guidelines.
Right,
And we know that historically, this has been the case as well.
right.
What I'm concerned about is about 2 weeks down the road is that we're going to receive new guidelines that will turn some of the things we've put in place on its head. And I didn't know if you had heard anything from the Department of Education about, and there will be more information following around any, okay, that's what I was
Again,
wondering.
but to your point, I mean, I didn't even know it was going to come out of the thing on Friday, right?
Okay.
So like, the communication sharing has not always been optimal during this pandemic. But there's nothing they previewed for us that potentially could be coming out of the gate. I think the only discussion has really been around masking over the last couple of weeks. So when they do, I'll forward it off to you. But anything else I think would come as a result of what's happening, community spread-wise, within the state.
Thank you.
All right, anything else? I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Hey, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.